Chapter 37-31. What's more, Maki Fujino, who had been taken away by their instructor, Hirano Ridge, had not returned yet. They were not in the mood to communicate. They were not in high spirits and were in low spirits. The foreign soldiers could naturally feel it. Thinking about how the Japanese and Chinese students had not returned for a long time, they even missed dinner time. Although they did not know what had happened, they could feel that the Japanese students had a deep hostility towards the Chinese students. In the past, they were also very wary of the Chinese students. But now, it had turned into hostility. It seemed that something big had happened for the two countries' students to return so late. What could it be? There were still a few foreign soldiers who thought about it before going to bed. As they thought about it, they also fell asleep. At 5 o'clock the next day, the whistle to wake up sounded on time. The students of each country all jumped up when the whistle sounded. They finished dressing and washing up as quickly as possible. Within 5 minutes, they were all gathered. The orienteering event officially started at 6 o'clock sharp. After breakfast, there was time to discuss how to complete the last event of the competition as soon as possible. Li Jinyan and the Chinese students only had 20 minutes of breakfast time. He was still the same as before. He did not interfere with the competition at all and let the students make their own arrangements. This was a competition as well as a form of training. Since the students were here, they had to make their own decisions. As an instructor, he only needed to give some constructive suggestions. There was no need for him to consider everything for the students, and there was no need for him to worry about everything for the students. The current generation of soldiers had to forge ahead. How could they see the rainbow without going through the rain? During breakfast, Li Jinyan said to the 16 students who had just woken up in high spirits, "You have 6 hours of competition time. It is also the last 6 hours of competition time. Make good use of it and grasp what you want the most in your heart. Also, be careful of the Japanese students who see us as enemies. Maki Fujino and Rina Fukumoto are the key targets. Also, Michiko Matsumoto and Yi Chien, pay attention to your side. I won't say much nonsense so as not to give you psychological pressure. Do what you have to do. If something really happens, I will take care of it. You guys can do whatever you want. I will take care of the rear. You guys will take care of the front." There was no need to say anything else. Just this sentence alone was enough. Instantly, the Chinese students were filled with confidence. Although they had 20 minutes of breakfast time, after the assessment team distributed the detailed rules of the assessment, everyone ate their breakfast as quickly as possible and began to discuss the strategy for the last 6 hours of the competition. There are a total of 40 coordinates, and the time limit is 6 hours. It ends at noon, and our search area is in this area. Zhang Minghong spread out the map and slowly drew on it with the pencil in his hand. He then looked at the scale. The 40 coordinates were scattered, and Zhang Minghong pursed his lips slightly. The scope is a little big. If there are any delays in the middle, it will be very difficult to complete within 6 hours. The Chinese student took a look at the search area. It was indeed a little big. After conversion, it was as big as 200 mu. Yi Qian took a look and sighed with a smile. The range is indeed quite large, but think about it. All of the foreign military cadets are searching for the coordinates within this range. This range is not small at all. We have to strike first to gain the upper hand. The further the coordinates are, the more time we waste. That was the main point. Everyone wanted to find the nearest coordinates, so if students from several countries found the same coordinates in the process, it would be a little tricky. In that case, we still have enough time to ambush the Chinese students. We're currently ranked 7th, 121 points behind the Chinese team. Even if we get full marks this time, it's impossible for us to surpass the Chinese team. However, the Chinese side is currently in 4th place, and the 5th place is not that far behind them. Once the Chinese side is held back by us, the 5th place will most likely overtake them. Since we don't have a chance to overtake the Chinese team, we'll give number 5 a chance to overtake them. As long as we can pull China down, anyone can surpass us. After Michiko Matsumoto finished speaking, the Japanese students were silent for a moment before they all nodded lightly. They didn't have a chance to overtake the Chinese side, but they could drag the Chinese side to death and give the fifth team a chance to overtake them. Chapter 37-33. With such a plan, the Japanese students made up their minds to keep an eye on the Chinese students after they entered the forest. They were ranked 7th, and the 8th place was 42 points behind them. Therefore, they could only sit firmly in the 7th place with 10 points. But the Chinese students couldn't do that. The 5th place was only 30 points behind them. As long as they took action and suppressed the Chinese students, they could definitely pull them down from 4th place to 5th place. As long as they saw the Chinese students' ranking drop, they would be happy. Last night, they bowed their heads and apologized to the Chinese national flag. At the end of the day, the Chinese student Yi Jian shot down their flagpole and made their sun flag fall down. Thinking of what happened last night, the Japanese students' eyes were burning with anger again. This time, even the instructor, Pinji Ling, supported them. They had to seize the opportunity. At 7 o'clock sharp, the students of Japan, who were waiting for an opportunity to take revenge, followed the Chinese team closely like a dogskin plaster. When Tian Qin said that, Yi Jian thought about the appearance of the dogskin plaster and their sun flag. She couldn't help but smile. But she didn't say it out loud. Although the Japanese students were very disrespectful to the Chinese flag, as a soldier, she would not insult another country's flag casually. This was the basic quality of a soldier. If she insulted the flag casually, then what was the difference between her and Fujino Maki? After entering the forest, they couldn't immediately find the coordinates. According to the prompt, the students from each country had to go 5 kilometers deep to start. And these 5 kilometers happened to be the most dangerous path for the Chinese students. Walk faster. They're following us too closely. It looks like something is wrong. The 3 students walking at the back whispered to the students in front of them through the wireless headset. Yi Qian, who was walking in the middle, stopped and said softly, "Jiang Yang, I will exchange positions with you." Jiang Yang wanted to say he can handle it, but Zhang Minghong said, "Yi Qian will cover the rear. She is better than us in dealing with unexpected situations. For example, if someone suddenly played a trick, she could deal with it immediately." When he said this, Jiang Yang understood and quickly exchanged positions with Yi Qian. The students from various countries had already entered the primeval forest. Last night, the students from various countries were still happily interacting with each other like friends. However, when it came to the competition, they all saw the students from other countries as their opponents. Even if they bumped into each other, they would not exchange a single word. In fact, they were even filled with vigilance. When the Chinese and British students met, the students from both countries stared at each other. Finally, the 2 team leaders nodded slightly, and then one went to the left and the other to the right. Seeing this, the Japanese students who were watching from behind had an ugly expression on their faces. They thought that the British students would delay the Chinese students, but they actually had scruples and went around them. Michiko Matsumoto opened the map and looked at it again. With a cold gaze, she walked to Maki Fujino and whispered a few words to him. Not long after, they, who were following closely behind the Chinese students, chose to go in the same direction as the Italian students, bypassing the Chinese students. Their departure did not cause the Chinese side to let down their guard. Instead, they sensed that something was amiss. Yi Qian looked in the direction they had left with a dark look in his eyes. They might be planning an ambush. Let's reconsider our route. After that, Yi Qian contacted the Chinese students in this way. She was not afraid of an ambush, but she did not want to be delayed to death by the Japanese students. And it was very likely that the Japanese students had this idea. If they really wanted to play an ambush, then let them lie down and wait for an hour or 2. Let them panic. Chapter 37-34. After Yi Qian and Zhang Minghong had a discussion, they spread out the map and rearranged the route. After about 10 minutes of discussion, the Chinese students, who were wearing camouflage combat uniforms and carrying 27 kilograms of luggage, plunged into the depths of the forest. The Chinese students gave up on the 5 closest coordinates and entered the depths of the forest as fast as they could. There is a certain difference between the coordinates of this assessment and the coordinates of the national competition. In a national competition, the coordinates were marked with the number 1, and they had to be searched in order. However, the coordinates of this competition were not in order. You had to find one. Since most of the students were rushing towards the 5 closest red and green coordinates, and the Japanese students were very likely to be up to no good, they might as well go around the closest coordinates and enter the forest. In this way, the marching speed of the army had to be increased. Marching into the depths of the forest did not pose any pressure to Yi Qian. She could not even remember how many times she had marched into the forest. Facing the unfamiliar and complex terrain, Yi Qian led the army to speed up their search for the coordinates. Time passed bit by bit. The Japanese students who were waiting in the middle of the road could not wait any longer. Looking at the time, an hour had already passed, and the Chinese students who should have appeared earlier were still nowhere to be seen. Are they not here yet? Are they lost? It has already been an hour. If they are not lost, they should have appeared in our search area. 54 minutes. We have been waiting for 54 minutes, but they still have not appeared. I also think that they are lost. If they are really lost, then our time has also been delayed. We did not get any coordinates, and we did not find any Chinese students. As soon as this was said, the entire channel fell into silence. That's right, the Chinese students being lost had also delayed their time. Michiko Matsumoto looked at the time. Her expression was not very good. She pressed down on a microphone at the corner of her mouth and said to the leader, Maki Fujino, Fujino-kun, we cannot wait any longer. An hour has already passed. We cannot wait any longer. Half an hour ago, she had reminded Maki Fujino that they should not continue to wait. However, Maki Fujino did not accept her suggestion. He replied, we need to be patient. Since then, he had been waiting until now. Now that they had waited for an hour, there was still no sign of the Chinese students. Matsumoto Michiko's attitude was much tougher than it was half an hour ago. We've wasted too much time, Fujino-kun. If we keep waiting, there won't be any good results for us. We can't wait any longer. It's very likely that the Chinese side has already discovered our plan and has already taken a detour. How is that possible? Where would they go? Don't they want to get the nearest coordinates? With how cunning the Chinese students are, how could they give up on the nearest coordinates? Rina Fukumoto was completely on Maki Fujino's side. She insisted that they would be able to wait until the appearance of the Chinese students. Maki Fujino stared at the changing numbers on his watch. When an entire hour had passed, and he still did not see any signs of the Chinese team, his eyes turned cold as he said in a deep voice, it is indeed possible that the Chinese team has discovered our plan. Let's retreat first. Fujino-kun, Rina Fukumoto, who wanted to continue waiting, was unwilling to give up. We have already waited for so long. Are we going to give up now? If we give up now, wouldn't all our waiting be in vain? Chapter 37-35. Rina Fukumoto's growl made Michiko Matsumoto's expression turn even gloomier. She crawled out from behind the bushes. Due to the weight of her luggage, she had been pressed down for too long. When she got up, she felt that half of her shoulder had lost feeling. With one hand holding the gun, she rubbed her numb left shoulder against the rough tree trunk to loosen upper meridians. As she moved, she coldly replied to Rina Fukumoto, if we continue to wait, we'll waste even more time later. While there's still a chance to make up for it, we must retreat immediately and hurry up and find the 40 coordinates. She was glad that the competition's rule was that 1 point would be awarded for finding a coordinate. If the 40 coordinates were not found within 6 hours, the score would be 0. Then, since they had already wasted an hour, they could foresee that their score would be 0. The Chinese side must have noticed their plan, so they absolutely could not wait any longer. Now, it was up to them to see if they had the chance to meet the Chinese students in the depths of the forest. It was not up to the Japanese students to decide whether they could meet each other or not. The Chinese students, who were one step ahead, met the students from the United States, Germany, and Russia, but they did not meet the Japanese students. When they met the students of the 3 countries, they all avoided them in a friendly manner. Both sides did not even have time to greet each other before speeding into the depths of the forest. After 3 hours, the Chinese students had already found 27 coordinates. After 4 hours, they had found 34 coordinates. After 5 hours, they had found 38 coordinates. As time went on, the coordinates became harder and harder to find. Now it was time to return. We can't go any further. Retreat. The last hour was the time to retreat. Once the time was up, Zhang Minghong immediately stopped moving forward. Yi Qian led the team to return according to the original plan. The Chinese team found 38 coordinates within 5 hours, which was already quite fast. Li Jinyan's mouth slightly tightened. The possibility of continuing to move forward and find all the coordinates was very high, but there was obviously not enough time. Then what would the Chinese students choose? He hoped that they would return immediately. Just as he was thinking this, the Chinese students turned around from the front. In other words, the Chinese students did not choose to continue moving forward, but to hurry up and return. Although the probability of going back to look for 2 more coordinates was small, it was much more reliable than going forward to look for the coordinates. 5 hours of walking through the primeval forest had already exhausted most of the students' stamina. This was the case for the students from various countries, but there were also a few students who chose to give up halfway. This was because they understood that even if they continued to move forward, they would not be able to find any more coordinates. It was better to reach the destination earlier. The 39th coordinate was found when they were going down the slope. The appearance of this coordinate gave the Chinese students a boost. Now, there was only 1 coordinate left. They discovered that the last set of coordinates was at the bottom of a large rock. Yi Qian and Zhang Minghong spread out the map again and calculated the time it would take to reach the coordinates and the time it would take to reach the endpoint. Not long after, they came to a decision. If they ran down to get the coordinates and increased their marching speed, they would still be able to reach the finish line ahead of time. The Chinese students, who couldn't afford to waste time, received the order from their leader, Zhang Minghong. They didn't have any objections, and all of them did their best to rush to the foot of the mountain. Chapter 37-36. When more and more green tracks were left by the Chinese students on the screen, the instructors from Qin, Ma, and the other Asian countries all pursed their lips. In the last competition, they had once again witnessed the strength of the Chinese students and the fearless spirit of the Chinese soldiers. Although their students' performance was not bad, compared to the Chinese students, they seemed to be lacking something. The Chinese students found 40 coordinates and started sprinting at a very fast speed. Especially at the end of the sprint, which was close to a 45-degree slope, the Chinese students did not relax at all. They took each other's hands and reached the finish line at the speed of a 100-meter sprint. A few instructors who felt that their country's students were lacking something compared to the Chinese students saw the final sprint of the Chinese students and immediately understood what their country's students were lacking. They lacked a tenacious fighting spirit, and the tenacity of the fighting spirit directly determined the strength of the combat power. The Chinese students were indeed very strong, but they were not strong enough to make them afraid. What really made them afraid was their tenacious fighting spirit. Such tenacious fighting spirit was even more frightening than their own strength. This time, the Chinese team won first place in the final competition with an absolute advantage. They were the first to reach the finish line and also the first to find all the coordinates. As for the foreign troops who reached the finish line earlier, even if they reached the finish line earlier than the Chinese team, first place had nothing to do with them. The Chinese students completed all the competitions. As the instructor, Li Jinyan walked towards the students who had won glory for their country amidst the praises of the foreign military instructors. The sun was shining brightly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was even brighter than the sun. That's right. The rankings and all the glory in this competition were obtained by the students through their own efforts. As the instructor, he did not give any advice or accompany them throughout the whole competition. He only stood in front of the screen and quietly watched the competition, waiting for the good news. Now that the good news had arrived as promised, Li Jinyan, who had always been handsome and cold, had a smile that was even brighter than the sun. The students who had handed their heavy luggage to the examiners in turn could finally sit down and rest for a while. When they saw their instructor coming over, Zhang Minghong immediately shouted, "Everyone, stand up." His voice was hoarse and tired. It could be seen how hard these 6 hours were. Even though it was hard, it was worth it. His body was exhausted, but his heart was filled with excitement. Looking at the young faces in front of him, seeing the stubbornness in their eyes and the growth of this generation of young soldiers, Li Jinyin stood in front of them. He slowly raised his hand and saluted the soldiers who had won glory for the country. On the other hand, the Japanese instructor, Hirano Ryu's expression was as gloomy as a rainy day in winter. It was so gloomy that it could rain at any time. He had actually allowed the Chinese side to reach the finish line ahead of time, and even allowed the Chinese side to find all the coordinates. Last night, he had clearly told them that they must think of a way to prevent China from achieving good results today. In the end, they did not do anything at all. For a whole 6 hours, the students from their country did not meet the students from the Chinese team. How could this be? They had been waiting in the same place for an hour. Could it be that they hadn't run into any Chinese students during this hour? Since they didn't touch each other, why didn't they move for an entire hour? Flatfield Ridge, who did not see the path of the Chinese students, could not think of a solution. Were their own students not moving for an hour to stop the Chinese students? Chapter 37:37. The instructor, Hirano Ridge, couldn't think of a solution. The Japanese students couldn't think of a solution either. They couldn't understand why they had encountered students from several countries during the 6-hour competition, but not the Chinese students. It made them wonder if the Chinese students didn't complete the competition and directly reach the finish line. When they saw the Chinese flag flying in front of them, the Japanese students were so shocked that they almost vomited blood. It wasn't that the Chinese didn't participate. They did, and they reached the finish line ahead of them. Bastard! Bastard! How'd they do it? How'd they do it? Seeing the red flag flying in front of them, Fukumoto Rina was so shocked that she almost lost her mind. She stopped walking and just stared in front of her, shouting and yelling. Her yelling didn't scare the other students. Yes, Fukumoto was right. How'd they do it? All the Japanese students' hearts were in pain, and their mood was even worse. They didn't find all the coordinates, and they didn't stop the Chinese at all. In this round, they lost again. Once again, they lost to the Chinese team. Their hearts were overgrown with weeds. When the Japanese students arrived at the finish line, everyone's face turned green. They were no longer as humble and respectful as they were on the first day, but in fact, they did not hide their arrogance. Compared to the Korean students who withdrew from the competition, they suffered a bigger blow. They suffered a double blow mentally and physically. At 12 o'clock sharp, the 7A competition ended. The rankings from the 10th to the top were announced. Every time the ranking of the countries was announced, there would be a loud applause. When the Chinese team's ranking was announced, the applause became even louder. The appearance of the Chinese students made them understand how ridiculous their arrogance was, especially when they learned that Monfei didn't even send an invitation to the Chinese team. They looked down on the Chinese team even more. Before they even met the Chinese students, they already knew that they must be weak. Otherwise, how could they be ignored by Monfei? The reality shocked them again and again and made them understand how ridiculous their previous thoughts were. When the Chinese students went up to the stage to receive their medals, the applause was even louder than before. The 3 senior generals who gave the medals shook hands with the Chinese students one by one and said, "Your performance has impressed all of us, and let them see the bravery of the Chinese soldiers. Your country must be proud to have you." This was a heartfelt praise, absolutely from the bottom of his heart. Listening to the tide-like applause and seeing the smiling faces of the Chinese students, the Japanese students standing below the stage all secretly clenched their fists. When the Chinese students walked off the stage, another round of applause broke out. It was really like a high tide, and they were struggling in the tide, almost suffocating. On the stage, Yi Chien inadvertently glanced at the Japanese students and saw Michiko Matsumoto staring at him coldly. His gaze lingered on her for a moment before it slowly moved away. The war correspondent sent the photos and negatives he had taken of the Chinese side over the past few days to the Chinese side, especially the photo of the Chinese soldiers standing in front saluting the national flag, while the Japanese students stood behind with their heads bowed and apologized. This photo became a classic photo. When Yi Qian saw this, her eyes turned into crescents. This photo, she really wanted to make a copy of it and put it in her book. Unfortunately, all the photos had to be handed over. Not a single one could be leaked out. Chapter 37-38. The war reporters had taken many photos of the Chinese students. According to the rules, they were not allowed to directly take photos of the front faces of the students from the other countries. As a result, Yi Qian did not have a single front face photo in the stack of photos in his hands. There wasn't even a clear profile photo. All of them had been blurred out. These photos are very memorable, especially this one. The war reporter from Monfei pointed at the photo Yi Qian was looking at and smiled. This photo is shockingly similar to a period in history. I know about the history of your two countries. When I pressed the shutter, I thought you guys would definitely like this photo. She was a female reporter about 30 years old. She spoke very steadily. Just by listening to her, one could tell that she was a very qualified war reporter. Yi Qian neatly put away all the photos and smiled politely. I really like it. Thank you, Joey. Oh God, you actually know my name? Joey's eyes widened in surprise, revealing an expression of disbelief. She was black, and when her eyes widened, her whole facial expression was very exaggerated. Then she laughed happily. This is really exciting. I didn't expect you to remember my name. She was very happy. As she spoke, she habitually touched the camera hanging in front of her chest. Because Yi Qian knew her name, even his tone of voice became much more intimate. Oh, I almost forgot. I think you need this. She took out a small brown bottle from her pocket and pointed at Yi Qian's injured fingernail. You should take care of this. You can't just leave it like this. The kindness from the war reporter made Yi Qian's lips curl up slightly. Her fingernail was injured when she crawled under a car to retrieve the flag. After the military doctor took care of it, she did not take it to heart. This injury was nothing to her. Yi Qian took the iodine and thanked her with a smile. He said, "It's already much better. I think it will take at most a week for a new fingernail to grow out." Yi Qian opened the fingernail. Considering today's competition, the military doctor did not remove it. Instead, he used gauze to bandage it. In today's match, Yi Qian felt that the gauze would affect the flexibility of his fingers, so he took it off and let the war reporter see it. Joey said in a serious tone, "Although this is a minor injury that doesn't need to be mentioned, now that the competition is over, you don't have to worry about how the flexibility of your fingers will affect the competition. I think you can go and bandage it again. This will prevent infection and allow the wound to heal faster." Although his finger was no longer bleeding, the entire fingertip was black and blue, which looked quite frightening. Happy that the Chinese student remembered his name, Joey enthusiastically suggested to bring Yi Qian to the military doctor. Yi Qian did not refuse. The competition had already ended, and she had been in a tense state for 7 consecutive days. She also wanted to take the opportunity to take a walk and get some fresh air. The military doctor had his own tent, and Joey had a good relationship with a few military doctors. Before he even entered, he had already greeted them. When Yi Qian approached the tent, he saw that the Japanese student, Maki Fujino, was also there. Beside him was Michiko Matsumoto. When the two of them saw Yi Qian enter, their rigid expressions became colder. Yi Qian was the Chinese student they did not want to see the most. Michiko Matsumoto stepped to the side to block Maki Fujino. She also bowed politely to Yi Qian. She took the initiative to greet him politely. Yi Qian also bowed with a smile. Chapter 37-39. Destroying peace has always been the strength of the Japanese students. Yi Qian smiled and bowed, then walked to another chair and sat down. Are you here to treat your injured finger? Is it serious? Yi Qian's polite smile was met with Michiko Matsumoto's concern. Her gaze had already fallen on Yi Qian's injured finger, and her slender eyebrows knitted slightly. It looks very serious. Is it infected? Her expression and tone made it seem like she was really worried about Yi Qian. She was the only one who knew whether she was truly worried or just faking it. Since the other party intended to be polite, how could she ignore it? Naturally, she chose to accept it and treat it politely. Thank you for your concern. It shouldn't be infected. Michiko Matsumoto heaved a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to say something, Maki Fujino, who was stopped, said in a deep voice, Michiko, we can go now. Okay, Fujino-kun. Michiko Matsumoto immediately turned around. While speaking, she did not forget to bow to Yichien. Then, she supported Maki Fujino, who was extremely depressed, out of the tent. When she walked out of the tent and passed by Yichien, her footsteps suddenly paused. She seemed to inadvertently look at Yichien. Her eyes were instantly filled with coldness. Yichien, who seemed to have sensed her gaze, generously met her gaze. He saw Michiko Matsumoto's pupils suddenly shrink. Their gazes were like two cars that suddenly crashed into each other on the highway. A short moment of contact was enough to create sparks. This time, Michiko Matsumoto's face did not have the polite smile from before. She nodded again to Yichien, who was looking at her, and supported Maki Fujino out of the tent. Chinese student Yichien. She is a terrifying existence. Such a person should not appear in the Chinese troops who are deeply hostile to us. Michiko Matsumoto, who walked out of the tent, did not have a trace of a smile on her face. She was a completely different person from before. A terrifying existence, and also a dangerous existence. Fukumoto plans to report to the Fukumoto family after returning to the country, and I will also mention it to the Fujino family. As Michiko said, she is indeed a very dangerous person, especially when she has committed an unforgivable crime. Maki Fujino said slowly and eerily. His entire aura was exceptionally cold. There is only one way to deal with those who have committed unforgivable crimes. What was the solution? He didn't say it, but Michiko Matsumoto understood. After a while, she shook her head and said, from the past few days, it can be seen that China's management of the military academy students is quite strict. The solution you mentioned is very difficult to achieve. Whether or not I can do it, I still need to try. Maki Fujino stared straight ahead. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. She insulted their sun flag. Did she think that she would be safe once she returned to China? Yichien, who was accompanied by Joey, was already tending to his wound. Just as the military doctor was reapplying Yichien's nails, Joey picked up his camera and took a close-up shot of the scene. Yichien was not in the shot, only a slender finger that was being disinfected. Due to time constraints, Joey did not manage to clean up this photo and hand it over to the Chinese side. Later, this photo was approved by the Chinese military and published in Monfei's military newspaper. In the end, this photo was also published in Monfei's largest newspaper. When Xia Jinyuan saw this photo, his gaze was fixed on the small old scar on the hand. His eyes were filled with turbulence. This hand was the hand of the person he missed dearly. Chapter 3740. His little fox actually came to Monfei to participate in the competition and even led the Chinese students to achieve good results. The corners of Xia Jinyuan's mouth curled up with much difficulty, but he quickly suppressed it and pursed his lips tightly. Her fingers were injured, and it was obvious that the injury was serious. After reading the entire English article, Xia Jinyuan's thin lips were pursed so tightly that they resembled thin blades, and his fingernails were flipped open. The 10 fingers were linked to the heart. How painful must it be? Xia Jinyuan, who had not seen Yichien for several months, held the newspaper like this. Even though there was no frontal photo, he still stared at the hand that appeared in the photo, as if he could see the person he missed through the photo published in the newspaper. Xia, my friend, why are you hiding here? I've been looking for you for a long, long time. A rough voice came from behind. Xia Jinyuan calmly retracted his gaze from the photo. His hands did not move, and his eyelids drooped slightly as he continued to read the newspaper. He only looked up from the newspaper when the other person came closer. Looking for me? Why are you looking for me? If I remember correctly, you should be by Cobra's side today. The person who came was a Caucasian man wearing a white t-shirt and black sweatpants. Although his facial features were deep, His appearance was very ordinary, but he had an oppressive and fierce aura, which made him look very masculine. He sat down and very casually took the newspaper from Xia Jinyuan's hand. After glancing at it, he let out a soft tisk and directly threw the newspaper down from the rooftop. He said very disdainfully, "It's a competition for a group of children. Just a little injury, and they wantonly report it. What a group of military school students who are only fit to be raised at home." After that, he leaned his back against the wall of the rooftop. He bent his arms slightly behind his back and leaned against the iron bars on the wall. He said to Xia Jinyuan, "The person Cobra is looking for has been found. Come with us tonight. Xia, Cobra is thinking more and more highly of you. It's a good thing for you, but it's a very bad thing for some people. You have to be careful." After the Caucasian man finished speaking in a low voice, he suddenly leaned over. His brown eyes were like a snake staring at its prey. He stared at Xia Jinyuan as if he wanted to see through him, but also as if he wanted to verify something. After a while, he said, "Xia, you saved me before, so I believe you. But Cobra doesn't trust you that much, so you have to perform well tonight, understand? It doesn't matter to me whether Cobra believes in me or not, as long as I believe in myself. I'm a little hungry. Do you want to have a drink with me? What do you want to drink? Vodka or Martell?" At the mention of a drink, the murderous Caucasian man suddenly became excited. He straightened his body that was leaning against the wall, raised his arm, and put it around Xia Jinyuan's shoulder. As they walked, they talked about what kind of drink they should have next. This was Cobra's winery, and there was no shortage of all kinds of wine. If you open a bottle, you could drink from the afternoon until the sky turned dark. The discarded newspaper was thrown into the trash can. Xia Jinyuan did not pick it up. Here, his every move was being monitored, and he could not do anything out of the ordinary. Night had come, and the lights in the winery went from bright to dark. Several jeeps drove out of the winery and rushed into the vast night. It was time to work. Sitting in the car, Xia Jinyuan looked to the front with an indifferent face, as if he had no interest in what he was going to do next. Chapter 3741. The place they were heading to was a factory. The car was parked several kilometers away from the factory. Xia Jinyuan, who had a gun stuffed in his hand, stood in the dark, quietly listening to a man speak. "Cobra wants us to bring her back tonight. Listen carefully, bring her back tonight. If we don't bring her back tonight, then one of you will be unlucky. Do you hear me?" The one who spoke was a black man. When he said, "One person will be unlucky," he glanced at Xia Jinyuan coldly. Seeing that Xia Jinyuan was indifferent to everything as usual, the black man couldn't help but look at Xia Jinyuan viciously. It was this Asian man who appeared out of nowhere and almost took away his position beside Cobra. If he didn't bring her back tonight, he would definitely make this Asian man suffer. The black man thought to himself viciously and glared at Xia Jinyuan again. Only then did he lead his men to the location of the factory. They didn't make a move immediately. They waited until the second half of the night before taking action. At this time, the armed personnel guarding the entrance of the factory were gradually showing signs of fatigue and became lax. Xia Jinyuan and the white man who spoke during the day avoided the patrol of several armed personnel and quickly slipped into the factory. Then, with lightning speed, they took care of the two armed men guarding the entrance of the factory. When the white man saw Xia Jinyuan's nimble actions, he couldn't help but lean over and whisper, "You're very fast. That's why Mike doesn't like you. Luke, aren't you afraid of being overheard?" After Xia Jinyuan finished speaking lightly, he took the lead and flashed into another entrance. He flashed in first. After confirming that there were no problems, the white man, Luke, flashed in and leaned against the wall. In the dim light, he saw Xia Jinyuan in front of him, gesturing a number to him. Damn it! Two people were walking towards them. Just kill them. He made a horizontal cut at the side of his neck. The footsteps in front of him were getting closer and closer. He took a deep breath and quickly approached Xia Jinyuan. The sound of footsteps could be heard. Xia Jinyuan winked at him. The two of them went out almost at the same time. They covered the mouths of the two gunmen who were about to smoke to refresh themselves and dragged them into the room. They killed them with a crack sound. Damn it, If a few more came, they would be discovered. The Caucasian man, Luke, kicked the man who was no longer breathing. He then picked up the man's gun, removed the magazine, and threw it aside. Damn it, they haven't come in yet. Do they want us to fight to the end? Luke, who had done a series of things, saw that there was still no movement from the people outside. He said to Xia Jinyuan with a gloomy face, "Xia, do you think they will come in?" "I don't know if they will come in or not. I only know that Cobra must see the people inside tonight." Xia Jinyuan glanced at him indifferently, took out a gun, and put on a silencer. He flashed to the door and took a look, then quickly retreated. "No one is here. Let's hurry up and go." The white man, Luke, who was one step behind, narrowed his eyes. This Xia, he really couldn't see anything wrong with him. Why did Cobra ask him to keep an eye on him? Luke took out his gun and put on a silencer. Whether there was a problem or not was not up to him. It was up to Cobra to decide. Next, it would depend on Xia's performance. Walking out of the room, Luke followed closely behind Xia Jinyuan. The two of them, one in front and one behind, walked along the corridor of the factory with low footsteps. The people they wanted to bring back were said to be on the 4th floor of the factory. They had to go up to the 4th floor now. Chapter 3742. The factory was a steel processing plant, and there were bundles of cylindrical steel pipes with a black luster everywhere on the ground. The small ones were the size of an adult's thumb, and the big ones were as thick as an adult's arm. After passing through the long corridor of the processing area, there was a turn, and there was an iron staircase leading to the only 6-story building in the entire factory. The white man Luke carefully followed behind. Sometimes he had his back to Xia Jinyuan, and sometimes he was facing Xia Jinyuan and secretly followed him step by step. And all the movements of the two were transmitted to the outside through the button-shaped miniature camera on the white man Luke's collar. The person who was observing the movements of the two was none other than Cobra, whom Xia Jinyuan had always wanted to get close to. He was a ruthless character who did not trust anyone and dared to use people. Xia Jinyuan had been here for several months and had shown his face several times in front of him. He had also made a few small achievements, but he still had not had the chance to get close to him. It could be seen how cautious this person was. A very interesting Eastern man, usually like a lazy man, but every time this kind of thing happens, Cobra's wolf-like eyes stared at the computer screen, and while speaking, he gently shook the red wine crystal goblet in his hand. He took a sip of red wine and said to the Asian woman with long black hair and fair skin beside him, "How about it? Are you interested?" The young Asian woman with long black hair picked up the crystal goblet in her hand and smiled at Cobra. She raised her glass gracefully and smiled charmingly. "I can help you once, but you have to help me once too. Only then can we continue to cooperate in business. Don't you think so, Mr. Cobra? Deal, and I wish us a happy cooperation." Cobra raised his glass and lightly clinked it with the Asian woman with delicate facial features. "I'm very interested in him, and I really don't want him to be attracted by Miss Yoshiko's charm. If he is attracted by my charm, then, Mr. Cobra, I'm sorry. I will be very happy to take him back to our country." Yoshiko winked playfully, and her eyes and teeth were like a young girl in her late 20s. But Cobra knew that the woman from Japan in front of him was so ruthless that she even dared to send her own mother to a mental hospital, just because her mother thought that her brother was more suitable to be the family's heir. Cobra didn't answer her. She just raised her eyebrows slightly and revealed a melancholic smile. How could he let her take away someone he was interested in? No, if there was really a problem with him, he would not let anyone take him away. Since a very powerful fellow could not be used by him, it was better to get rid of him. There would be no worries, and he would not have to worry about whether he would meet him in the future. His smile was reflected in Yoshiko's eyes, and her red and full lips slightly curved. She had no interest in people who were interested in Cobra. No matter how capable she was, it was impossible for her to bring him back to her country. If Cobra was a big poisonous snake, then the people under him were all small poisonous snakes. No matter how small a poisonous snake was, it was still highly venomous. Who would want to keep a poisonous snake by their side? It was a pity that the handsome Oriental man was gone. Although she liked his looks, he was still a poisonous snake. The two of them didn't notice that when the man they were staring at slowly walked towards the iron staircase, his lowered black eyes faintly swept past Luke's collar. Xia Jinyuan glanced at her from the corner of his eye and confirmed that he was suddenly being stared at. Chapter 3743. Luke did not know that Xia Jinyuan, whom he had been monitoring, had not only sensed that there was something wrong with him, but also knew that he was carrying special equipment. He slowly walked up the stairs and retreated step by step. The pistol with a silencer was always in his hand, ready to shoot as soon as he sensed danger. The people outside finally sneaked into the factory and carefully approached the 6-story building that they had to besiege. The two of them took turns to walk down the iron stairs. In front of them was a tightly locked fire door. Xia Jinyuan first pushed it lightly, then pushed it heavily, then pulled it outwards again. He even shook the handle twice, but the door did not move at all. Cobra, who was staring at the screen, saw this scene and was not angry. Instead, he laughed. Although he was very powerful, sometimes his reaction was not so powerful that he could do anything. If he was so powerful that he could do anything, he would be even more suspicious. An omnipotent young man must have undergone special training. He had completely lost contact with Poseidon, who had not sent back any news. For Poseidon, he had even sent 4 subordinates to China, but there was still no news. There was no news of Poseidon, but there was an Asian man by his side. His appearance was too coincidental, and he could not help but suspect that there was something wrong with this Asian man. However, after observing and investigating for a long time, there were no problems. Except for some fights and a few years of prison life, there were no problems. Hopefully, there was nothing wrong with him. Cobra lowered his head and hid all the emotions in his eyes by drinking. If Finzi could really take away the people around him, then he would have to think carefully about whether there was something wrong with him. Luke's face turned red from holding back his laughter. He patted Xia Jinyuan's shoulder, who was still trying to fight with the fire door. Now you need to move aside. It's my turn. Xia Jinyuan turned to look at him, pursed his thin lips, nodded slightly, and retreated to the side with his gun in hand. In less than a minute, he heard the sound of the door being pushed open behind him. He looked sideways and saw Luke pushing the door open with one hand. He looked vigilant and motioned for Xia Jinyuan to go in first, and he would cover the rear. The person who went in first was usually the one who would encounter the most danger. Xia Jinyuan did not hesitate and quickly went in. Then Luke stuck close to the fire door and went in. However, the moment he entered, he was dumbfounded because he saw 3 men with 3 guns. One of them was aiming at Xia Jinyuan, who had sneaked in first, while the other 2 were aiming at him. When Xia Jinyuan saw him enter, he glanced at Luke from the corner of his eye. The silencer in his hand was hooked to his thumb, and it was obvious that he was ready to disarm. Negative. Why didn't you remind me? When Luke saw that the situation was not right, he immediately raised both of his hands. The pistol was also hooked on his thumb. This was troublesome. There were 2 AKs, and they only had pistols. How could they escape from danger? Xia Jinyuan said calmly. You didn't give me the time to remind them, and they didn't give me the time to remind you either. The moment he pushed the door open, he was pointed at with a gun. It was obvious that the other party had been waiting for him. The 3 men with guns roared and waved the AKs in their hands. Put your guns on the ground. When Luke saw this, his eyelids twitched. Negative, they could easily cause the guns in their hands to go off by accident. Okay, buddy, we'll put our guns down immediately. Don't get agitated, don't get agitated, Luke said repeatedly. He bent down and put the guns on the ground. When he bent down, he took the opportunity to ask Xia Jinyuan, who was also bending down, are you confident that you can kill them? Chapter 3744. Now was not the time to blame each other. They had to solve the danger in front of them first. Xia Jinyuan slowly put down his gun and answered softly, I'm a little confident, but we have to let them get close to us first. Being pointed at by a gun in the head was a common occurrence, but he had never been pointed at like this in real life. As for how they found out and waited, they probably saw the locked fire door being pushed open while they were patrolling. When Luke pushed the door open, He didn't do anything to slow down his movements. He pushed it open just like that, and was unlucky enough to be discovered. Right now, they had to get out of this situation first. If they delayed any longer, it would only become more and more disadvantageous for them. I don't want more people to point their guns at us. Let's get rid of them as soon as possible, Xia Jinyuan said in a low voice as he got up, but there was not much fear on his face. Cobra had already seen the situation inside through the button camera. He did not express any displeasure towards Luke's mistake, but instead became more interested. He wanted to see if this Asian man who successfully attracted his attention could successfully break out of the encirclement without alerting anyone else. Breaking out of the encirclement like this should be very difficult. Breaking out of the encirclement was not difficult for Xia Jinyuan. The difficult part was how to not attract the attention of Cobra, who was staring at him like a poisonous snake. Oh, right, Cobra translated as Cobra. The person who was staring at him was a poisonous snake, not like a poisonous snake. Xia Jinyuan, who had already vaguely heard footsteps, lowered his eyes slightly. There was not much time left. He began to clench his hands tightly, then slowly loosen them. He tried to let Luke, who was half a step behind him, record his entire body movements so that the poisonous snake on the other side of the camera could see clearly. He was not as calm as he looked. How was it possible for a person with a gun pointed at his head to remain calm? It was impossible. He was only calm on the surface, but inside, he was anxious, afraid, and uneasy. This was to let Cobra see. He had to let him see. Although he did not get close to Cobra after a few months of hiding, he still had some understanding of his habits. He knew that it was best to control a person's weakness and use it to his advantage. He could easily control this person and use him to his advantage. In the beginning, in order to attract the snake's attention, Xia Jinyuan had no choice but to display his strength. Now that he had entered Cobra's eyes, it was time to let the other party know his weakness. This was a psychological tactic, and Xia Jinyuan was one of the best at it. Sure enough, when Cobra saw Xia Jinyuan's little movements, her artist's melancholy eyes narrowed and her interest deepened. As for Yoshiko, who hadn't left yet, when she saw the man secretly revealing uneasiness and fear, her eyes flashed with disappointment. She had always been confident in her charm. She had her own ways to win over a good-looking man like the one inside. The premise was that this was a man who was worth her effort to win over. The moment the man in front of her entered the camera, she was really moved. Perfect figure, perfect facial features, perfect temperament, and perfect height. It was as if it was tailor-made for her. She liked it. In the end, such a perfect man was scared of a few AKs. What a pity. Funzi lowered her head and took a sip of red wine, hiding the disappointment in her eyes. What a pity. She thought that if Cobra really didn't want this man, then she could pick him up. But now, if he gave it to her, she had to think about it. Good-looking men always had a flaw. It was too disappointing. Chapter 3745. Just as Yoshiko lowered her head to take a sip of the wine, her eyes that were looking at the screen suddenly stopped. Then, as if she had discovered a new continent, her eyes burst out with a great light. The red wine in her mouth had not yet entered her throat, but her whole person almost lost her self-control. She suddenly raised her head, staring at the screen with shining eyes. On the screen, the man suddenly made a move with an incomparably handsome movement. His hands were so fast that she didn't even see clearly how he had grabbed the AK that was pointed at his head. Then he raised his leg and kicked the lower abdomen of the black man holding the AK. The AK that was pointed at his head just now was already in his hands. In an instant, the roles had been switched. Yoshiko didn't see how he made a move. She only saw how he raised his leg and snatched the gun. The two movements were so handsome that she couldn't help but lean forward. Her eyes were filled with interest. Cobra's interest was piqued. He raised his eyebrows and took a sip of the red wine in the crystal goblet. The subordinate beside him took the red wine in his hand respectfully and didn't even ask if he wanted to continue. Luke's reaction was half a beat slower, mainly because he didn't know how to break out of the encirclement. However, his reaction was fast. When he saw what Xia Jinyuan did, He immediately followed suit and snatched the gun for the other party's hand. The other black man with the AK was obviously stunned by the scene in front of him. He was stunned for a moment and gave Xia Jinyuan and Luke the opportunity to snatch the gun. Xia Jinyuan wanted to use his fist to solve the problem, but Luke threw away the AK he snatched and pulled out a pistol with a silencer from his waist. He fired 3 consecutive shots at the 3 people, and the 3 lives disappeared in an instant. Really, I thought I was going to die. I really didn't expect. Luke wiped the sweat off his forehead and gasped for breath. Xia, you saved me again just now. You've saved me twice now. Thank God for letting me have you by my side. After saying that, he even drew a cross on his chest devoutly. Xia Jinyuan took a few deep breaths to adjust his breathing. He picked up the AK that was thrown to the side, turned his head to look at Luke, and shook his head as he walked away. Wait for me, buddy. After praying, Luke saw this and shouted so softly that only he could hear it. He immediately chased after him. The footsteps coming down the stairs were getting closer. Xia Jinyuan leaned against the wall and took a deep breath before saying to Luke, "Later, we'll rush in together. You take care of the people on the left, and I'll take care of the people on the right. How about it?" "No problem. Let's see who's faster." Luke raised his eyebrows disapprovingly. Xia Jinyuan shouted in a low voice, "Attack." Xia Jinyuan and Luke rushed out at the same time. They aimed at their targets and shot at them with their pistols. The 4 patrolmen didn't react in time and didn't even see clearly who was attacking them. They all lost their lives and fell down from the remaining stairs. Xia Jinyuan, who was only willing to praise him, looked downstairs and then downstairs. His thin lips tightened a little. "Are they not coming in? They're already on the 3rd floor. You want to rush in with me to look for them? I think we should wait. It's too risky for the 2 of us to go in together. If something like that happens again, I think I'll faint." Luke refused. He didn't seem to be in a hurry to find them immediately. Seeing Luke's performance, Cobra nodded his head in satisfaction. Luke, one of his bodyguards, was a guy who was very good at disguising himself. He was also one of the bodyguards that he admired very much. Chapter 3746. Luke was not only Cobra's bodyguard, but also his informant. If anything happened, Luke would report to Cobra in a timely manner. Cobra had always trusted him. After listening to Luke's words, Cobra, who was originally sitting lazily, moved his body slightly from the left to the right. With one hand on the armrest and the other hand gently rubbing his chin, he waited with interest for the Asian man's answer on the screen. "Summer. Not bad. I like summer. The heat emitted can make people burn." Cobra said in a low voice. His melancholy eyes seemed to add a touch of sunshine, sweeping away his decadence. Yoshiko, who was sitting next to him, slightly pursed her red, full lips. She was full of interest towards the Asian man on the screen. She had never seen such a handsome and powerful action, instantly subduing her. Handsome and powerful. Even if she had to pay for it, she would be willing to. She wanted to take this man for herself. The more difficult it was to get, the more she wanted to get. So, how could she get this man? Obviously, Cobra didn't want to let him go. If he didn't want to let him go, it meant that she had no chance to get this man she was interested in. She had never failed to get people or things she was interested in. This time was no exception. No chance? Then, she would create a chance. Opportunities would never be given to those who waited. Opportunities would only be given to those who were good at creating opportunities. Cobra, who was staring at the screen, didn't notice that the beauty next to him began to hit the Asian man he was interested in. He saw that the man on the screen looked at Luke with some dissatisfaction, as if he wanted to say something, but perhaps felt that it was inappropriate. He tightly pursed his lips, revealing a trace of coldness. Just when Cobra was a little disappointed that he didn't hear what he said, Xia Jinyuan, who was standing next to Luke, softly said, "Cobra ordered us to bring back the person he wants to see tonight. It's already 2:30 in the morning. Luke, there are only 2.5 hours left before dawn. Are you sure you still want to wait?" Such an answer sounded very ordinary, but it made Cobra, who was testing him, laugh. Not bad. He kept his orders in mind. When he told Luke, he also told him his concerns. Most importantly, he clearly had concerns but he didn't make a decision on his own, which made him quite satisfied. He admired powerful people, but he wouldn't admire someone who was powerful and opinionated and preferred to make his own decisions. He was quite satisfied with Xia Jinyuan's answer. Of course, the shrewd Xia Jinyuan would definitely give an answer that satisfied Cobra, because everything he did was to satisfy him. Luke nodding his head, he looked at Xia Jinyuan with a very serious look. Xia, you're right. We shouldn't keep waiting for them. Let's go. After that, Cobra, 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 and Cobra, Cobra, and Cobra, 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 and Cobra. The security on the 4th floor was stricter than any other floor. Xia Jinyuan immediately withdrew his body after he leaned forward. He moved his fingers to indicate a number of people. When Luke saw this, he immediately cursed, F***CKU. There were 8 people, and they only had 2. 1 against 4. Did they have a chance of winning? He gestured to Xia Jinyuan to see if they should make a move or wait for backup. Cobra. Xia Jinyuan took out his pistol and raised his eyebrows slightly. Luke gave him a thumbs up, indicating that this was a good solution. Chapter 37:47. The 2 of them had pistols equipped with silencers and loaded the bullets. Without showing themselves, they hid in the corner and started shooting. There was no need to mention Xia Jinyuan's shooting skills. The reason why he attracted Cobra's attention was because of his excellent shooting skills. As one of Cobra's bodyguards, Luke's shooting skills were also quite good. The reason why Xia Jinyuan suggested to shoot directly was because he knew Luke's shooting skills. The pistols equipped with silencers made da-da sounds when they were fired. Usually, the first shot would not attract much attention. Only when the person who was shot fell to the ground would people be alarmed. However, at this time, the second shot had already been blocked by the firing pin. By the time people reacted, another person had been shot and fell to the ground. The 2 of them with good shooting skills were also very fast. Even if there were 8 people, 1 against 4 would be enough to deal with them. Da-da, 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 da-da. Continuous gunshots rang out weakly and quickly ended. The 2 of them did not give the armed guards a chance to shoot and instantly killed 8 people. Seeing this, Cobra nodded slightly several times. He was getting more and more satisfied with this courageous and obedient guy. He raised his hand slightly, and someone immediately approached and bowed respectfully. Cobra only needed to slightly tilt his head to give an order. Yoshiko did not hear what Cobra said. She only saw the bodyguard who was ordered nodded and strode away in less than 10 seconds. He must have gone out to do something. As for what it was not something she knew. Although she wanted to know, it was better to restrain herself a little in Cobra's territory. Yoshiko forced herself to focus on the screen and stared at the man who interested her to reduce her curiosity. Cobra only ordered one of his subordinates to go to the factory to look for people to support Luke. Seeing this, he was already quite satisfied with Xia Jinyuan. Xia Jinyuan soon knew that their backup was clearing the path and that someone was attacking from the other side of the stairs. Following a burst of gunshots, the originally quiet 6-story building was instantly engulfed in gunfire. All the firepower was concentrated on the other side of the stairs. Xia, I finally don't have to worry about whether my life will be left here or not. Go. Luke heard gunshots from the side and knew that Cobra had made a new arrangement. The corner of his mouth that was slightly pressed down had already curled up. It was true that he was worried that he would lose his life here, but now, it was also true that he no longer had to worry about his life. It was all because he had reinforcements. Xia Jinyuan could see the subtle changes in Luke's expression. Could it be that the cunning and cautious viper had finally begun to retract its tongue and stop probing him? Could it be assumed that he was one big step closer to Cobra, and would most likely become one of the venomous snake's bodyguards? Luke's lips curled up slightly. Xia Jinyuan, who had been working hard for months to get close to Cobra, also smiled. The 2 of them did not stay any longer and quickly rushed to the 4th floor. This time, they did not use their pistols. They directly picked up the weapons they had picked up from the 3rd floor and rushed to the 4th floor. The rear was the most difficult to guard against. The 2 of them opened fire, and several people fell into a pool of blood. Luke swept away the timidity he had in front of Xia Jinyuan. At this moment, his face was full of viciousness and his gaze was bloodthirsty. He raised his weapon and opened a bloody path for Xia Jinyuan. To Xia Jinyuan, he did not feel any pressure at all to get rid of these people in front of him. They were all evil people who were accomplices to the evildoers. They were a danger to ordinary people in society. Xia, kick the door. Chapter 37:48. Luke, whose eyes had turned red from all the shooting, roared. Xia Jinyuan immediately ran to the door where he was at and kicked it hard. This kick was so powerful that the entire door cracked open and the lock inside was sent flying. Inside, there was no one holding a gun. There was only a large and sturdy wooden cabinet. From the outside, it was impossible to see what was inside. Luke glanced at it and then looked at Xia Jinyuan. His eyebrows furrowed. A wooden box? Are we looking for a wooden box? It's a very large wooden box. It can fit a few of us. Xia Jinyuan picked up the AK in his hand and carefully approached the wooden cabinet. Luke aimed his gun at the locked side of the wooden cabinet and signaled Xia Jinyuan to pry open the lock with his eyes. Xia Jinyuan walked closer and used the butt of his gun to smash the iron lock. Dong, dong, dong. With a few forceful blows, the entire lock was smashed off. At the same time, Yoshiko saw that the screen was pitch black. Cobra stood up and said to her in a very gentlemanly manner, "I'm sorry, Miss Yoshiko. I have something to take care of right now. I'll get them to send you back to the hotel to rest. A lady will be more beautiful if she stays awake. Good night, Miss Yoshiko." He had already gotten the people he needed. He could go over and take a look. Yoshiko's eyes flickered slightly. She shrugged her shoulders lightly and indicated that she did not need to trouble Cobra to arrange for someone to send her back to the hotel. She could bring her own people back to the hotel. Cobra did not force her. The two of them happily bid each other farewell and went about their own business. Xia Jinyuan slowly lowered the cabinet door. He did not face the cabinet door directly. Instead, he leaned sideways and used the barrel of his gun to pry it open. With a loud bang, the cabinet door was completely opened. Sounds of struggling could be heard, and Luke pointed his gun inside as he roared, "Raise your hands." "I'm sorry, Luke. They can't raise their hands." Xia Jinyuan saw the three of them huddled together. Their hands and feet were tied, their eyes were blindfolded, and their mouths were gagged. They were frightened, and their bodies were still trembling slightly. When Luke saw this, he chuckled and put away the gun. He then took out a photo from his pocket and looked at it. That's right. It's the three of them, a biochemical doctor and his assistant. We're looking for them. A biochemical doctor and his assistant? Xia Jinyuan was stunned for a moment. Luke had already taken out his phone to contact the people outside and asked them to drive the car to the factory as soon as possible. "Xia, bring the three of them out. I'll cover you and leave this damn place." It seemed that because of the arrival of the reinforcements, Luke suddenly had more trust in Xia Jinyuan. He gave him the task of charging and breaking through the enemy lines, while leaving the relatively safe task of bringing up the rear to Xia Jinyuan. The three people who were tied up could hear everything outside, but their eyes were tied up and there was no way for them to see clearly. They fell into the terrifying darkness and were roughly pushed out of the cabinet. Struggling sounds came from their throats, as if they were begging for help. Luke replied casually as if he was teasing them. No, we're not here to save you. We just happen to need you. You've just fallen into our hands from the hands of another group of people. All right, doctors and assistants, quiet down. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that the bullet won't hit your heart." The three people who were pushed out of the cabinet stiffened. They thought they were saved, but in the end, they were just a bunch of bastards who kidnapped them. Chapter 37:49. Other than loosening the ropes on their feet, nothing else was done. Luke also asked Xia Jinyuan to tie the loose ropes on their feet together. This way, the three of them would not be able to escape even if they wanted to. Luke was very cautious. Before leaving, he took out the photo and looked at the faces of the three people again. Only then did he take the lead, and Xia Jinyuan brought up the rear. Together with Dr. Biochemistry and his two assistants, they left the factory. The three of them were like fish on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. When the two of them came out, Luke, who was still holding the phone in his hand, contacted the people guarding outside. Got it. Give Mr. Smith a big gift. Xia, and I will bring people out. Dr. Biochemistry and his assistants were completely passive, especially when they heard the dense gunfire. They were so shocked and scared that they did not dare to think about escaping. Even if they wanted to escape, there was no way they could escape with the three of them tied together. So far, they could only follow a group of unknown people. Leaving the factory was much smoother than sneaking into the factory. At least they did not have to be careful. When they saw someone rushing over, they picked up the AK in their hands and fired a burst of gunfire. The gunfire seemed to come from all directions. Xia Jinyuan and Luke cooperated with each other and rushed out with Dr. Biochemistry and his two assistants, who were stumbling as they walked. Smith's backup also came quickly and started a bloody battle outside the factory. Cobra's people were already prepared. If there were too many people, they would throw grenades. If there were too few people, they would shoot directly. Eliminating the backup from all sides made Xia Jinyuan and Luke's evacuation much smoother. They left the factory in less than 10 minutes. Less than a minute after they left, the entire steel processing plant exploded. The huge explosion suddenly came in the wee hours of the morning, startling half of the city. The entire factory turned into a huge fireball. Everything was engulfed in fire. Even the fire trucks could not do anything. They could only watch the fire burn. A big explosion in a steel processing plant in the second largest city in Normandy was reported in the newspapers the next day. Even the domestic military newspaper published the big explosion. It was written that the explosion was caused by the high pressure generated by the boiler. As for what the real situation was, the military newspaper did not give a detailed explanation. It only wrote that it was suspected that the explosion was caused by the high pressure generated by the boiler. The death toll was as high as 37 people, which was quite shocking. When this news spread to China, it also attracted considerable attention. The steel factories even received a safety rectification notice, requiring every steel factory to recheck all the boilers in the factory to avoid similar accidents. Yiqian had also seen the news, but he did not pay much attention to it. It was only because it was published in the military newspaper that the cadets had to read every day that they took a serious look at it. After reading it, they also treated it as an accidental explosion. What she didn't know was that her boyfriend, Xia Jinyuan, was one of the participants in the explosion. She also didn't know that her boyfriend finally got close to Cobra because of this incident. Another cold winter came. Yiqian slowly walked through the school wearing a military coat. His military boots squeaked as they stepped on the thick snow. The sky and earth turned white overnight. Everywhere was covered in white snow. It was white and flawless. Last year, when it snowed, she still walked in the snow with him. She listened to him talk about the interesting things that happened when he was studying at the National University of Science and Technology. The two of them occasionally bumped into each other's shoulders, and her heart was as sweet as honey. But today she was already... Yiqian looked up at the field. Roughly calculating the time, she and Captain Xia had been separated for nearly 10 months. Chapter 3750. They had not seen each other for 10 months, had not spoken to each other, and had not sent any messages at all. When her longing grew like weeds, she could only take out his photo and sneak a peek. At night, she would put the photo under her pillow. This way, it was as if she could snuggle up to him, feel his body temperature, hear his heartbeat, as if their parting had only been yesterday. The snow was a little heavy, and the north wind was blowing with a chill that could destroy everything in the world. Standing in the snow and looking ahead, Yiqian raised her hand to gently wipe away the snow that had blown onto her face. Then she lifted her foot and walked towards the political commissar's office. She wondered what the weather was like over there. Was the sun shining high in the sky? Or was it raining cats and dogs? Or was it like now, with snow swirling around? She wondered if he had lost weight, if he had tanned, if he was safe and sound. Was there always a hint of mischief hanging at the corner of his mouth? He must be very tired. He was fighting alone without any outside support. Even if something really happened, no comrades would be able to rescue him in time. All the suffering would have to be shouldered by him alone. Would he, who bled but did not cry, be afraid when he was alone? Senior. Two students were walking towards her. When they saw Yi Qian, they immediately stopped in their tracks. They were both freshmen today. During the National Day's training, the freshmen had all learned of Senior Yi Qian's name. The reason was simple. The instructor had talked too much about her, so they naturally remembered her name before they even met her. When the freshmen gradually integrated into this military academy, where they would be studying for 4 years, they finally realized how powerful Senior Yi Qian was. She had once used a military deception during a first-year drill to set up a fake base station that was recorded in her syllabus. That drill was really exciting. Even though the red team, led by Senior, lost in the end, it was still an exciting loss. And one of the words she said during the drill was a piece of advice given to them by their seniors from the previous cohort. The existence of a drill is to discover and defeat. All of them firmly remembered those words in their hearts. They also knew that the person who said those words was their senior sister, Yi Jian, who was standing before them. Yi Qian was already used to being recognized by the students on campus. Hearing this, she immediately stopped and smiled as she spoke to them. The two freshmen had just walked out of the library with a stack of books in their hands. Yi Qian knew which school they were from just by looking at the books in their hands. The predecessor of the Aerospace Science and Engineering School was the Missile Engineering School of the Military Engineering School. Established in the early 1950s, the school had 4 technical disciplines and 4 command disciplines. It was a national-level key discipline in aerospace propulsion theory and engineering. Their slogan was "Aspire to Aerospace," have the courage to take on responsibilities, gather intelligence to innovate, pursue excellence. The cadets who were able to enter this school were all intelligent. Sometimes Yi Qian regretted not going into the technical department, but this thought of regret only flashed through his mind for a moment and was quickly extinguished. Technical cadets rarely had the chance to fight on the battlefield. They spent most of their time in the laboratory. She preferred to be on the battlefield. Spending months in the laboratory was too difficult for her. After chatting with them for 3 to 5 minutes, Yi Qian quickened her pace and walked towards Political Commissariu's office. She was already in her 3rd year of university. She would definitely be demoted to a platoon during the winter break. Political Commissar, you might be looking for her to talk about demotion. Chapter 3751. She walked a little too quickly and did not see the junior who was leaving. He stopped and turned to look at her back for a few seconds. When he turned to leave, one of the students whispered, "Why do I feel like Senior's sister was quite sad just now? Did something happen to him? That can't be right. How could something happen to Senior's sister? Something didn't happen, right? Why do I feel like she just fell out of love?" Another student said softly. Immediately after, he was elbowed in the chest by his classmate. "What are you talking about? How could she fall out of love? I don't even see any guys around Senior's sister. There aren't many guys who would dare to appear in front of Senior's sister. Didn't they say that Senior Brother Zhang, who graduated last year, likes Senior's sister? In the end, Senior Brother Zhang even brought his girlfriend along. Don't talk nonsense. Why do you have such a big reaction? It's normal for Senior's sister to fall in love. It's also normal for her to fall out of love." The student rubbed his chest and squinted as if he had discovered something. He chuckled. "Tell me honestly, do you have a crush on Senior's sister? There are so many people who have a crush on Senior's sister. It doesn't matter if I'm one more." The student did not feel embarrassed about being seen through. He openly admitted and said, "It's just a crush. I won't disturb her. It won't affect Senior's sister in any way." "Good boy. You're quite capable. You even dare to have a crush on our senior sister. Aren't you afraid of being dragged to the training ground and beaten by our seniors?" The two of them spoke softly, not daring to be too presumptuous. After all, the inspection was everywhere. If they were caught, they would be interrogated for a long time. regarding the inspection, as long as it was a student who had passed a round in the military academy, no one could remain indifferent. Even Ichien was no exception. When the inspection was mentioned, his expression would change. It was an existence even scarier than an instructor. Ichien was already sitting in Political Commissar Yu's office. Just as she had guessed, it was indeed about this summer's transfer to the company. After the exam, she would immediately pack her luggage and head to the company with a few other third-year students. The transfer company has already received your information. Take the train there on the day of the exam. When you leave the train station, the company will send people to pick you up. Little Yi, I'll leave these 19 students to you. Take a look at their personal information first. The transferred company students would not be transferred from the same class to the same company. Instead, they would all be separated and transferred to different companies. Yi Jian took the information from Political Commissar Yu. She didn't know any of the 19 students. There were only 2 female students, and one of them was her. Chapter 3752. The train station was a little rundown. The group of 20 people lined up and entered the station with the other passengers. They did not receive any special treatment. The reason they were sent to the company was to train, so why would they receive any special treatment? The tickets were all green train tickets. The radio was broadcasting the train numbers that were about to arrive at the station and the train numbers that were about to depart. Yi Qian and the others followed the staff member who was holding a sign out of the waiting room. The moment they exited the waiting room, the 20 of them walked in an orderly manner. However, the passengers behind them rushed out and instantly broke their formation. Some passengers even used shoulder poles to carry things and knocked one of the male students to the ground. The winter break was close to Chinese New Year, so there were a lot of passengers returning home. There was also a lot of luggage. At this moment, everyone understood why Political Commissar Yu specifically told them not to bring too much luggage. If they brought too much luggage, there would be nowhere to put it. When they got on the train, the entire entrance was blocked. Everyone was anxious to get on the train and only cared about squeezing in. However, the more they squeezed, the harder it was for them to get on the train. The staff member shouted at the top of his lungs and pushed the people behind him with all his might. Only then did they manage to push the people in front onto the train. Yi Qian and the others waited until everyone had boarded the train before they lined up and got on the train. They received a lot of attention and a wave of discussion. When they boarded the train, the staff member wiped his sweat and whispered, "Soldiers are still more self-aware." The 20 people boarded the train, all sweating profusely. They held their military caps with one hand and carried their small camouflage luggage with the other. Finally, all of them boarded the train. Yi Qian and the others were already in their 3rd year of university. This time, they were sent to the company and would not return to the company until they graduated. The students had some yearning for the company life, so they could not help but feel excited when they got on the train. Going to the company was a green train ticket. The north wind whistled outside, and the air inside the train was turbid and unpleasant. It was exactly 7 o'clock when they boarded the train. The turbid air was filled with the smell of all kinds of food, but that was not the worst. The most unpleasant thing was the indescribable stench. Yi Qian had a very sensitive sense of smell. To her, the smell was no less than a chemical bomb. Even though her nose had been stuffed for the past few days, the smell was so unpleasant that it made her stomach churn. Yi Qian gently rubbed the tip of her nose. She leaned against the window and quietly listened to the female students talk. Occasionally, she would chime in so that there would not be an awkward silence. The female students who accompanied them were from the mathematics and system science department of the Faculty of Science and had been looking forward to the company for a long time. They sat down and whispered with Yi Qian. A group of 20 people sat in the same carriage. They were all dressed in military uniforms and sat upright. Even if they communicated, they would only lean slightly to the side. They maintained strict military discipline at all times and did not embarrass the school and the army. As they spoke in a low voice, they became the subject of discussion and observation of the passengers in the carriage. Some passengers had never sat on the same train with soldiers in military uniforms. They looked at Yi Jian and the others as if they were looking at rare objects. They looked at them and said something. They were very curious. Even though Yi Jian and the others were well-trained, being stared at by the passengers in the train, and some even stood up to look. The 20 people in the train were a little shy. They straightened their backs even more. They were afraid that they would lose their image as soldiers. Sitting back to back with Yi Qian, a few middle-aged men who had returned home from work spoke one after another. Every word they said drifted into Yi Qian's ears. Chapter 3753. This is great. With them around, I can have a good night's sleep. Yeah, with them around, I don't have to worry. I can sleep until dawn. We're lucky to have met a group of soldiers. They'll definitely be scared if they see us. We can fight anyone but soldiers. One of them can take on several of them. But why do I feel like there's something wrong with these soldiers? Look at their shoulders. They're different from soldiers. Huh? They're really different. I wouldn't have noticed if you didn't mention it. Who cares? I just know that I can have a good night's sleep tonight. These passengers had been discussing since they boarded the train. They didn't stop even after the train had left the station for more than 10 minutes. Hearing Yi Qian talk so calmly made their ears burn. Just as Yi Qian was about to rub his ears, a man's voice suddenly came from above. Comrade, I want to ask, what kind of soldiers are you? Why are you different from the soldiers I've seen before? It was a middle-aged man in his early 40s who had returned to his hometown to work for the new year. He looked honest and kind, with deep wrinkles on his forehead. Yi Qian looked up. He pointed at Yi Qian's epaulette with an embarrassed expression. Why is there a single bar here? What kind of soldier is a single bar? Students. We're still students. Yi Qian answered with a smile. Because he had stood up and leaned over the seat to ask, Yi Qian also stood up and answered, so we're a little different. The middle-aged man probably didn't know about the existence of military school students. After Yi Qian's explanation, he was even more confused. Students? Then you're not soldiers? You're all students? His expression changed. Then, he immediately lowered his head and said to his companion, Why are we still sleeping? They're all students, not soldiers. Actually, we're soldiers too. Yi Qian watched him sit down and silently sat down. He added in his heart. When the waiter on the train pushed the dining car over, the middle-aged man was still muttering, Why are the students still wearing military uniforms? Fortunately, he asked, otherwise, he would have thought that they were all soldiers. A bunch of students can wear anything, but why are they wearing military uniforms? Perhaps it was because there was a hint of complaint in his tone, but the waiter who was serving a Coke to a passenger next to him glanced at him, then leaned back to look at Yi Qian and the others. He stood up straight and smiled at the middle-aged man. They are military school students, not ordinary students. You know the National University of Science and Technology, right? The Tsinghua University and the Western University in the military school are very difficult to get into. After you graduate, you will directly become an officer in the army. You will be different from the soldiers you have seen. After the waiter finished speaking, the middle-aged men were obviously stunned. The middle-aged man who asked Yi Qian stood up abruptly and asked again, Is what he said true? Aren't you very powerful? The middle-aged man felt that he had to ask clearly as it concerned whether he could have a good night's sleep. Of course, he was also very curious. Yi Qian stood up again and answered with a smile, We are indeed soldiers. You can have a good rest. We will have someone on duty. Really? Yes, really. Yi Qian nodded and answered. The middle-aged man who received an affirmative answer was overjoyed. Thank you so much. We worked 2 nights to get back early. We were afraid that something would happen on the train tonight. Chapter 3754. The joy on the middle-aged man's face made Yi Qian's smile become even warmer. Sleep well, don't worry. Then I'll sleep. I'll sleep now. Thank you, comrade. With you guarding, we feel at ease. He wasn't the only one who felt this way. Everyone in the carriage felt the same way. To the people of the motherland, soldiers were their greatest support. Just seeing a soldier in uniform made them feel at ease. Yi Qian and the others were also happy to escort the people in the carriage who were returning home for the new year. Protecting the safety of the people was also their responsibility. When Yi Qian sat down, the female student sitting next to her, Ding Ling, said softly, "The people have left their personal and property safety to us. I'll sleep for a while. We'll take turns to be on duty in the middle of the night." Okay. Yi Qian nodded gently. She didn't feel sleepy at the moment. Her nose was even more congested after being irritated by the turbid air. Her temples were throbbing with pain. It seemed like her cold had gotten worse. Yi Qian, who hadn't had a cold in years, didn't know how she got it now. For the past few days, her nose had been congested, especially when she slept. It was so congested that she had to open her mouth to breathe. Now, not only was her nose congested, her head was also a little dizzy, but she didn't feel sleepy at all. When a male student sitting across from Yi Qian saw this, he said to Yi Qian through the T partition, "We'll take turns to be on duty. You Rong and Ding Ling sleep first. You and I will be on duty in the second half of the night. How about that? You should rest too. I'm not sleepy right now. I'll be fine on duty alone." Yi Qian smiled and looked in the direction of the corridor. Her voice was much softer. "We have to be more alert in the second half of the night." The second half of the night was when pickpockets are on the move, especially between 1 and 3:30 in the morning. It was the best time for pickpockets to commit crimes. There were also pickpockets who climbed onto the carriage. They had to be on guard in the second half of the night. That's fine too. The three of us will rest first. We'll be on duty in the second half of the night. The rest. The phone in her trouser pocket vibrated briefly, indicating a message. Yi Qian moved her body and took out her phone. When she saw the number, she smiled. It was a message from her father Fu. "Holiday? Back to the capital? I miss my son very much." It was a short message, but every word was filled with the warmth of a loving father. Yi Qian did not know that the corners of her mouth had been rising as she replied to the message, but there was a hint of sadness in the depths of her smile. She knew that Father Fu and Grandfather missed her very much, but they could not leave things behind and return to the capital to fulfill their filial piety. Since ancient times, loyalty and filial piety were difficult to achieve, and she had experienced it firsthand. Her slender fingers hovered over the various buttons, and a message filled with guilt was sent to Father Fu's phone. Father Fu didn't return to Beijing. He just came out of the laboratory that had been isolated from the world for 7 months. The first thing he did was charge his phone, call old Master Fu to ask about him, and then try to send a text message to his daughter. The reason he tried to send a text was because Father Fu had been in the laboratory for so long that he had lost track of time. He thought that Yi Qian should still be in class. When Yi Qian's message came in, Father Fu immediately exited and checked the date. He slapped his forehead and couldn't help but laugh. He had been so busy that he had even forgotten what the date was. Actually, Father Fu wasn't the only one who was like this. Many researchers in the laboratory were like this. In order to develop their own weapons, in order to overcome one difficulty after another, in order to improve the country's combat strength, Father Fu and the others, who had neglected sleep and food, only had the work in their minds. They did not care about anything else. Chapter 3755. Soon, Yi Qian received a text from Father Fu, telling her that he would be spending the spring festival alone again. As for where Father Fu was, Yi Qian knew that Father Fu must be at the military base. After not contacting each other for 7 months, Yi Qian and Yi Qian exchanged text messages one after another, making her forget that her nose was blocked. Later, when Xia Jinyuan was mentioned, Yi Qian paused for a while before replying to Father Fu. When Father Fu saw that Yi Qian had not contacted Xia Jinyuan for 11 months, he tightened his grip on his phone, and his expression turned serious. His daughter was a soldier, and now it seemed that the man who might kidnap his daughter was also a soldier. Moreover, both of them were not ordinary soldiers. In the future, if one of them went on a mission in the first half of the year, and the other went on a mission in the second half of the year, wouldn't they not be able to see each other until the end of the year? Father Fu's mood suddenly became very heavy. but he respected Yi Qian's choice and could understand it from Xia Jinyuan's point of view. After all, he was also a soldier who often went missing. To a soldier, between family and country, the family would always be the last, and the country would always come first. 2 days ago, in the laboratory, a young man who had only been in the laboratory for 2 years smiled and said to them, "Before I entered the laboratory, I called home." My wife joked that her biggest rival in love was her country, a rival so strong that she couldn't fight back. This sentence sounded like a joke, but in reality, the young man's eyes were red when he said it. This was because his child was born 3 months ago, and he had never seen his child before. He didn't know when his child was born, and he didn't even know the gender of his child. When his daughter married Xia Jinyuan in the future, she would also face the same problem. You have to understand, Xiao Xia. I believe that Xiao Xia misses you very much. But my child, since you've chosen Xiao Xia, you have to learn to endure the loneliness when you're alone. But Dad believes in you. Even if Xiao Xia isn't by your side, you won't be lonely, and you won't feel that waiting is a torture. Because you're also a soldier, and you know your responsibility. You two aren't the only ones who haven't seen each other for 11 months. There are many others like you who are experiencing the pain of separation. Take good care of yourself and become Xiao Xia's strongest shield. Don't let him worry about you when he goes out in the future. After waiting for nearly 15 minutes, Yi Qian received the message that he had received twice. After reading it, he felt a warm feeling in his heart. After chatting with Father Fu for 2 hours, she finally said good night. It was already 9:30 p.m. The inside of the carriage was much quieter than before. The children's crying had stopped at some point, and there were even snoring sounds coming from inside the carriage. Yi Qian held his slightly hot cell phone, and the smile in his eyes did not disappear for a long time. The student sitting opposite him noticed that Yi Qian was sniffing hard and realized that she had caught a cold. He told Yi Qian to rest for a while and that he would watch over her. Their seats were at the back of the carriage, so the male student did not sit down to watch. Instead, he stood up and scanned the entire carriage. Yi Qian slept until a few minutes past midnight. Her nose was so stuffed that she felt uncomfortable that she woke up. She and Yurong took over the duty for the rest of the night. At around 2 o'clock, about 5 minutes after the train stopped, Yi Qian heard some strange noises coming from outside the train. Chapter 3756. In her previous life, Yi Qian had taken the green train countless times and had encountered similar incidents before. 2 in the morning was the time when people were the most sleepy, so it was the best time for the pickpockets to move. When the train stopped, it was the best time for pickpockets to steal from the train. They usually didn't act alone, but in groups of at least 7 and at most 20. They would coordinate with each other and jump off the train as soon as they succeeded. This also made it difficult for the police on the train. As long as they jumped off the train, the chances of recovering the stolen property would be 0. Yi Qian, whose nose was stuffed to the point of discomfort, was very clear-headed. When she heard the noise outside, she held the small tea board with one hand and said to Yurong, "I'm going to take a walk. You guys keep a close eye on them. I'll leave this to you guys." Although they were military school students, they were soldiers in the eyes of the passengers on the train. They were soldiers who could make everyone sleep peacefully. This was the time to test them. Yurong also heard the commotion. Seeing Yi Qian go to take a look alone, how could he be at ease? Call 2 more to go with you. It's worrying if you go alone. He had also taken the green train before. Although he hadn't encountered today's incident, he had more or less heard about it. The green train heading towards Nangguang had the most pickpockets. They were especially rampant in the 90s. It wasn't until the crackdown in recent years that the situation improved. They weren't as brazen as before. Although they weren't brazen, they still did it in secret. Yi Qian, who was gently walking past Ding Ling, shook her head slightly. "No, I'm just going to take a walk. You and the others keep a close eye on them. If you discover anything, don't clash with them directly. Just take a walk in the carriage." Railway police passed by the train from time to time, but not every carriage was guarded by police. They just shuttled through one carriage at a time, so it was inevitable that they wouldn't be able to take care of the passengers. The pickpockets took advantage of this gap to make their move. From the time they succeeded to the time they left, it only took a few seconds. Although Yuron was also a third-year student, he was separated from Yi Qian. If it weren't for the fact that they were assigned to the same company, they wouldn't have had any interactions. His understanding of Yi Qian was limited to what he had heard. Seeing that she was insistent, he didn't stop her. He said, "Be careful." Then, he and Yi Qian went their separate ways. Just in case, Yi Qian had the other two male students wake up and keep an eye on them with Yuron. When they heard that pickpockets would appear, the two male students who had just woken up were no longer sleepy. After Yi Qian left, the three of them discussed and decided to wake everyone up. "Yi Qian, go to the front. We'll walk around the carriages at the back. Yuling, you stay here with Yuron and the others. All right, be careful. If anything happens, observe closely. Don't act immediately. These people are in groups, so don't get too separated." "Let's do that." The 20 students whispered to each other, then organized themselves and walked to the carriages at the back. Yi Qian walked past the aisle of the carriage in front. She didn't say anything. Her gaze was fixed on a young man wearing a black leather jacket and chewing bubblegum at the entrance of the toilet. She looked at the two of them, and they looked back at her. When they saw Yi Qian walking towards them, the hostility in their eyes intensified. As he got closer, the two of them changed from standing sideways to standing horizontally, directly blocking Yi Qian's path. "It's not convenient in front. Go back to where you came from. Let's mind our own business." "Know your place, soldiers," said the taller young man with a vicious gaze. Chapter 37:57. They spoke in an unfriendly tone, and it was obvious that something was going on. Yi Qian stood in front of the two men and said calmly, "Let's mind our own business. I'm going over now. Excuse me." The sound she heard earlier was the sound of someone climbing up the window of this carriage. It was snowing outside, and one of the men had rainwater on his leather jacket. It was obvious that this person had just climbed onto the train, but she heard more than one person climbing onto the train, so there were accomplices, and they were right in front of her. The two men stopped her from moving forward to prevent her from bumping into what they were doing. The two men probably didn't expect that someone would still play dumb after they made things clear. They were still wary of Yi Qian, not because she was a person, but because of the military uniform beside her. The young man with the rainwater on his leather jacket looked behind Yi Qian, as if he wanted to know if Yi Qian had any accomplices. After a few glances, he didn't discover anything. He whispered something to the young man, who stopped Yi Qian from moving forward. The fear on the young man's face disappeared, and he glared fiercely at Yi Qian. He said, "Soldier, are you sure you want to go over? Let us tell you, you can go over, but if you meddle in something you shouldn't, don't blame us for teaching you a lesson. Open your eyes wide and don't look for trouble. If she wanted to go over, she could go over. Why would she be afraid of a soldier? Moreover, she was a female soldier." Yi Qian ignored them. She saw the two men move and moved to the side to make a path that only one person could pass. Yi Qian directly passed through the two men. If she saw this, she would definitely intervene. The passengers in the carriage in front were also sleepy, and a few young men were still awake. They were smoking and playing poker. There was some small change on the table, and they were playing cards to kill their sleepiness. Here, because the four of them weren't sleepy, they didn't have any problems. The two young men who had stopped Yi Qian from moving forward followed closely behind him. They stared at Yi Qian's back as a small switchblade suddenly appeared in their hands. They swung it back and forth in a rather dashing manner. The young man who was playing cards took a look and continued to play with the cards in his hand. He didn't feel anything strange. After passing through this carriage and entering the other one could only hear the sound of snoring. Everyone was sleeping soundly. On the side of the aisle, there was a middle-aged man in his 40s who was slightly bent over to work. Beside him, there were two people covering him, blocking his line of sight. When they saw Yi Qian suddenly appear at the entrance of the carriage, the two young men who were covering for him were stunned for a moment. But when they saw the accomplice behind Yi Qian, their expressions relaxed. Yi Qian quickened his pace. "Soldier, don't be so shameless." She quickened her pace, and the two young men behind her immediately caught up. They threatened her in a low voice. "Look carefully. Where is this place? Us brothers are working, so you better know your place." Because the aisle of this carriage was full, Yi Qian wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he supported himself with one hand on the back of the seat and leapt over 3 sleepy passengers in an instant. The tips of his feet touched the ground, and he hurried forward. In less than 10 seconds, he was standing in front of the 2 young men who were on guard duty. His speed was so fast and ferocious that the 2 young men who were on guard duty were so shocked that they took a step back. The pickpocket, who was in his 40s, had already succeeded. He quickly stuffed his hand into his clothes and kicked the legs of the sleeping passengers who were blocking his way awake. He made the passengers make room for him and quicken his pace. He didn't care about Yi Qian's pursuit at all. Chapter 3758. These people were all habitual thieves on the train. They were not afraid of being discovered at all. They had the advantage in numbers. Most of the passengers on the train were ordinary people who had gone out to work and returned home. They were honest and did not want to cause trouble, nor did they dare to stand out. Unknowingly, they indulged this group of people. The middle-aged man who swaggered away after getting what he wanted was the leader of these youths. Everyone called him Brother Sue. As long as he had his eyes on someone, he would never miss. Even though he knew that he had been discovered by a soldier, he sped up and even whistled proudly. So what if he was discovered? What am I afraid of? He swaggered towards the carriage in front of him with a small switchblade in his hand. When he reached the middle of the carriage, he reached into his clothes, and something fell into the arms of a middle-aged man with a sallow complexion who seemed to be in low spirits. The middle-aged man stuffed the item into his clothes and closed his eyes to pretend to be asleep. The pickpocket who had turned his dirty hands relaxed even more. He walked to the end of the carriage and kicked a passenger who was snoring with his head tilted back and mouth wide open. Before the passenger was fully awake, he said in a hoarse voice, "Give up your seat." The person who was kicked awake was an uncle who was about 50 years old. He was wearing a shirt that was washed to the edges. The uncle was an honest man. He had worked so hard to make a living that his hair had turned white. When he was kicked awake for no reason, he was a little angry. However, when he saw the shiny switchblade in the man's hand, his eyes flashed with obvious fear. He lowered his head, pressed the corners of his mouth, and stood up silently to give up his seat. They could not afford to offend these people, so they could only hide. The middle-aged pickpocket did not get off the train. There were accomplices waiting for him in front, so he had to steal all the way to the front. Moreover, he had just gotten 3 tickets. If he did not make more money, he would not be able to celebrate the new year. Yi Jian, who was chasing after the middle-aged man, was blocked from the front and back. However, these people were nothing to be afraid of, especially the 2 young men who were covering for the middle-aged man. Yi Jian directly attacked with both hands. She grabbed each of their wrists with one hand and twisted them with force. Suddenly, the 2 men, who were about 1.7 meters tall, were twisted by Yi Jian until they screamed in pain. Pain, pain, pain. It was 2F*King painful. Let go, damn it. Let me go. The 2 men, whose arms were twisted to the point that they were about to break, did not forget to threaten her. If Yi Qian had not been concerned about the passengers on both sides of the aisle, she would have broken their arms and thrown them onto the aisle. Their sudden screams woke up many passengers in the carriage. They opened their sleepy eyes, but the secretions in their eyes had not been wiped clean. They vaguely realized that there was a fight in the carriage. Was there a fight? This discovery instantly made the passengers who had opened their eyes shudder, especially the few passengers who were sitting beside the 2 screaming men. It was as if there were needles on their seats, and they all jumped up and squeezed towards the window, squeezing the passengers who were sitting by the window until their whole body was pressed against the window, unable to move. What happened? What happened? The sleepy passengers saw a soldier, and a female soldier at that, fighting against 2 indecent young men. Although they didn't know what was going on, They subconsciously thought that the two indecent young men must have done something to provoke their comrade. People who wore military uniforms were the representatives of justice, no matter where they were. They would gain the trust of the people. Chapter 37:59. The two men whose arms had been twisted woke up with a start from the passengers. They instantly felt that they had lost all their face. The two men were so angry that they were afraid that their arms would be twisted off, but they did not dare to move. They shouted at the two people who squeezed over from behind, "Are you King blind? Come over and help." With their shout, many passengers woke up. At this moment, more than half of the passengers on the bus were woken up. When they saw the scene in front of them, they did not dare to rub their eyes and stared at the aisle. Everyone was very nervous. There were also some who were more vigilant. They quickly reached into their pockets and heaved a sigh of relief when they found that their hard-earned money was still there. However, there were also people who did not find it. "Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money?" He screamed and immediately panicked. He got up from his seat and searched his body with both hands. He did not find it on his clothes or in his pant pockets. He looked at the ground and still did not find it. "Look again, look carefully. Did you put it in your bag? Don't be anxious. The more anxious you are, the more chaotic it will be. Look carefully." The face of the person who lost the money changed drastically. He was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Layer after layer of sweat came out of his body. An old man raised his trembling hand and searched his body. After searching his left pocket and right pocket, he did not find the money wrapped in the silk cloth. The old man began to panic, and his hands trembled even more. He did not dare to get up. He sat with his legs straightened forward. He leaned sideways and searched his pants pocket. There was nothing. He still could not find the cloth bag that contained the life-saving money. The old man was so panicked that his body began to tremble. This was the life-saving money for his son. He was sick and needed money. He took out all his coffin money and planned to send it to the hospital for his son's treatment. There were notes and bills, all wrapped in cloth. When the old man who couldn't find the money retracted his legs, he was already trembling so much that his skin had dried up. Even the corners of his mouth were trembling. He supported himself with one hand on the black and gray leather seat and bent down to search under his feet. However, he couldn't find the money no matter how hard he tried. His hunched back made the passenger sitting opposite him feel extremely sad. "Old man, you lost your money, right? Well, the money is gone. The money for our son's treatment is gone." With one trembling hand, the old man tried his best to straighten his body. The moment he raised his head, tears flowed out of his murky eyes. The old man, whose wrinkles were like crisscrossing ravines, was very thin. He was so thin that he was like a leaf hanging on a tree branch, swaying in the cold wind. His voice was not loud, but it could be heard that he was very anxious. The life-saving money was gone. He didn't even know when he had lost it. How did he disappear? He had clearly kept it properly. So how could it have disappeared? When the passenger sitting opposite him saw this, his eyes turned red. He reminded the old man in a very soft voice, "Old man, you should look for that comrade from the People's Liberation Army later. She probably knows." The pickpocket must have been discovered by the comrade of the People's Liberation Army and caught on the spot. If that was the case, the old man's money would definitely be recovered. The traveler's voice was too soft, and the old man with poor hearing couldn't hear it clearly. He let out in a daze and lowered his head to lift up the corners of his tattered clothes to search. He had to look for it again. He had to look for it again. He remembered that when he sat down, he even touched the cloth bag. The money was still there. Why did the cloth bag with the money disappear when he just took a nap? Chapter 37:60. The old man didn't clearly hear what the passenger sitting opposite him said, but Yi Qian, who was only 2 seats away from the old man, heard it. Behind him, the 2 pickpockets who had been following closely behind him swung their fists at him. Yi Qian, who had never let go of the other 2 pickpockets' wrists, didn't even turn his head. He raised one of his legs and kicked the 2 in the stomach at lightning speed. The passengers sitting behind the 2 had already retreated to the side, not daring to get close. This gave Yi Qian the space to make his move. Yi Qian, who had kicked the diaphragm of the lower abdomen, sent the pickpocket flying with one kick. Ah! The pickpocket screamed, clutching his abdomen as he curled up in pain. No one could withstand being kicked in that position. Moreover, Yi Qian's kick was very strong. If he really used all his strength, he could even injure a person's guts and spleen. Although the two pickpockets were curled up in pain, Yi Qian still held back a little. Otherwise, he could have sent them to the hospital for surgery. The two pickpockets were beaten up by Yi Qian. The other two who had their wrists twisted were dumbfounded. They knew they were unlucky to have met a tough opponent. Knowing that they had met a tough opponent, they didn't dare to be as arrogant as before. What dignity! What shame! All of that was put aside. Now they were only thinking about how to get away. They quickly smiled. Comrade, let's talk things over. Let's not hurt each other. You have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Let's talk things over. The two who were shocked and scared forced out a smile. They were afraid that if they angered the female soldier in front of them, she would kick them like the other two who had fallen to the ground, screaming in pain like pigs being slaughtered. 1F King kick each of them to this extent. How could they still be arrogant? Yi Qian didn't give the two a chance. He pushed forward with both hands, grabbed their elbows, and removed them with force. Two even louder screams were heard. Even the front and back of the carriage could hear it. The passengers in the car were all shocked by the screams of the four people. Then they saw the two people standing with their arms hanging limply like noodles. As for the knives in their hands, they were confiscated by the comrades of the People's Liberation Army who came out to suppress the scene. Not only did he dismember their arms, Yi Qian also quickly pulled out a belt from his waist and tied the two men's legs together, cutting off any chance they had of escaping. As for the other two, Yi Qian believed that they would not be able to stand up for at least 15 minutes. In just a few minutes, Yi Qian had taken care of the four fierce-looking pickpockets. Some of them were still sleeping soundly, and those who had just woken up did not even know what had happened. They looked around in confusion. Yi Qian walked to the old man, who was wiping his tears anxiously. She held the old man's withered hand and squatted down. She said to the old man with certainty, "Grandpa, don't worry. I know who stole your wallet. Don't worry, I'll get it back for you now. Please sit down. I'll definitely get the money back for you." The old man was so anxious that he was in a daze. He didn't hear what Yi Qian said at the beginning, but he heard the last sentence, "I'll definitely get the money back for you." The old man grabbed Yi Qian's hand. He was so excited that he couldn't say a word. From his eyes, Yi Qian could tell what the old man wanted to say. "I'll get your life-saving money back. Trust me, Grandpa." Grandpa, quickly let go of this comrade's hand. She still wants to get the money back for you. If you don't let go, she won't be able to get the money back for you. Chapter 3761. Two other passengers who had been robbed heard it. They were so excited that they rushed out of their seats and surrounded Yi Qian, talking to her anxiously. "Comrade of the People's Liberation Army, and mine, and mine. That's my salary for a year. I'll use this money to pay off my debts and pay for my 3 children's school fees. Comrade of the People's Liberation Army, please do me a favor and help me get it back. I'll kneel to you. I'll kowtow to you." The man who had never cried or knelt while carrying a family's livelihood suddenly knelt down in front of Yi Qian. Fortunately, the old man let go of Yi Qian's hands so that he could immediately stop him from kowtowing. The other passenger was a young girl. She was a waitress at a restaurant and did not earn much. Her home was far away and there was no mail. She carried a year's worth of savings with her and was going to take it back to clean up the leaking roof of her home. In the end, her money was stolen as well. She was the first to scream in panic just now. When she saw others kneel down, she cried until she could not catch her breath. She was so angry that she also knelt down in a hurry. "Comrade of the People's Liberation Army, my money was stolen too. There's 4,000 yuan. It's the money I saved for a year. I still need to use it to repair my home. My parents are waiting for me to go home. Please." Yi Qian had stopped one, but he could not stop the second one. Fortunately, the passenger next to her reacted quickly and supported the young girl. He said, "Don't waste time. Otherwise, The pickpockets will run away. They had already been delayed for 2 minutes. Sit here and wait for my news. The two of them were helped up by the passenger next to them. Yi Qian, whose nose was so stuffed that even his voice changed, immediately got up. He gave a brief reminder and walked to the front of the carriage. Don't worry, don't worry. With the comrade of the People's Liberation Army here, your money will definitely be recovered. What a powerful comrade. He's not even afraid of fighting 4 people with small knives in his hands. He even beat them up in a few moves. Don't worry, the money will definitely be recovered. The passengers who had not been robbed were emboldened by Yi Qian's actions and began to discuss among themselves. As for the 4 pickpockets who had been beaten until they could not get up, no one dared to approach them. They only glanced at them from time to time. Even the seats over there were empty, so no one dared to sit there. Yi Qian, who had given chase, sent a text message to Yu Rong. After receiving the message, Yu Rong and the 3 students hurried over from the back of the carriage. The appearance of the 4 of them made the passengers in this carriage heave a sigh of relief. Now, the 4 pickpockets who had been beaten to the ground couldn't escape. Comrade, just the 4 of them. Hurry up and capture them. They were knocked down by a female comrade. Quickly arrest them and send them to the police station. 3 people here have been robbed. There was an old man who wanted to use his money to treat his son's illness, but it was also stolen by these inhuman things. You should be shot to death for harming others. Don't let it out to harm others. That's right. She stole money to save lives, and even stole money from an old woman. Her conscience has been eaten by a dog. A dog has more conscience than them. Yu Rong and the other 3 used their own belts as handcuffs to tie up the hands of the pickpockets. As for the other 2 pickpockets whose arms had been dislocated, they could not tie up their hands, so they simply tied up their hands and loosened the belts on their legs. What was even more ironic was that the 2 pickpockets whose arms had been dislocated had been so arrogant earlier. Now that they saw Yu Rong and the others coming over, they still had the face to ask for help. Comrade, my arms are broken. Can you send us to the hospital now? It hurts. It really hurts. Chapter 3762. With an indifferent expression, Yu Rong adjusted his military cap, and then he lifted one of the men's arms, which had been reduced to noodle size. Amidst the man's cries of agony, Yu Rong said indifferently, "There's no hurry. It's just a dislocated joint." As he spoke, he even swung the arm, causing the person to scream like a pig being slaughtered. Still arrogant? You won't even be able to cry for your parents. Their screams were met with great satisfaction. Someone clapped and shouted, "Good!" and all the passengers in the carriage started clapping. Good, good, very good. Our comrades are still the best. Once they appear, we feel more at ease. That's right, they'll definitely be able to get their money back. Good thing they found it, or else we definitely wouldn't be able to get it back. The police patrolling from a sleeper carriage were talking to Ding Ling and the others. They were surprised to see a few military academy students moving around in the carriage. After asking, they found out that a few military academy students had heard a strange noise and had gone to the front carriage to take a look. They had caught 4 pickpockets and were now being detained and waiting to be handed over to the police. Without stopping, they immediately walked towards the front carriage. At this time, Yi Jian found the middle-aged pickpocket who pretended to be a passenger and was pretending to be asleep on the seat. She walked over with a cold and sharp look in her eyes. Without even asking if the pickpocket had stolen the money, she twisted the pickpocket's right arm from behind and pressed the back of his neck with her other hand. Because she knew that in that short moment, the pickpocket must have transferred the stolen money. The pickpocket was very calm, so he really did close his eyes and pretend to be asleep. Yi Qian walked over and stood beside him. Although he sensed something, he did not expect to be recognized and grabbed his shoulder without saying a word. Based on his previous experience, the police would first ask him before making a move. In the end, Yi Qian's unexpected move made him panic. With his entire body pressed against his chest and his legs pressed against his abdomen, the pickpocket struggled to raise his head. When he opened his eyes, they shone fiercely. "Soldier, what the F*** are you doing?" You think you can mess around just because you're wearing a military uniform? I won't mess around. I'll only be ruthless. Yi Qian smiled faintly and said, I'll count to 3. If your partner doesn't step forward, I'll remove one of your arms. If your partner doesn't appear after I remove both of your arms, I'll remove both of your legs. Removing a leg is much more painful than removing an arm. You have to be mentally prepared. Yi Qian's voice was a little louder this time. The fact that the pickpocket dared to sit down here and transfer the stolen money was enough to show that he had an accomplice in the carriage. Wherever there was a pickpocket, all the passengers' money was not safe. It was better to wake everyone up and at the same time check to see if anyone's money had been stolen. The first to notice was the middle-aged man who had been kicked away by the pickpocket. He was nestled in the aisle connecting the carriages. When he saw a soldier subduing the man with a knife, he quickly stood up and stared at him. Who the F***ck are you threatening? Let go of me, do you hear me? The middle-aged pickpocket had never met anyone more unreasonable than him. When he heard this, he fiercely twitched his shoulders, wanting to break free and teach Yi Qian a lesson. He shrugged his shoulders, but he did not manage to. Instead, his entire body was pressed down even harder. A few passengers sitting together were startled awake. When they saw the scene in front of them, they shrunk their shoulders and leaned to one side. When a middle-aged woman sitting next to the pickpocket saw this, she hurriedly got up and squeezed out of the crowd without even wiping off the saliva on her mouth. She didn't even put on her shoes properly and directly stood in the aisle. Chapter 3763. The scene was a little scary. When the middle-aged woman moved, the other passengers also left their seats. In the blink of an eye, the only one left in the 6-seater seat was the middle-aged pickpocket who was immobilized by Yi Qian. The middle-aged pickpocket, who boasted of his vast knowledge and experience, did not take Yi Qian's words to heart. After he finished shouting, he said, I grew up scared. Why don't you try and see if I'm scared? Is there any justice in this world? I didn't do anything. I was just sitting here, and disaster fell from the sky. What's so great about being a soldier? Bah! Try and break my arm if you dare. I'll make you pay for it. He was determined to be shameless to the end. Most importantly, the middle-aged pickpocket believed that Yi Qian could not have seen clearly that he was stealing. As long as he insisted on sitting here, he did not believe that he would be ruthless. Yi Qian was not afraid of these rascals. There was only one way to deal with people who bullied the weak and feared the strong, and that was to be even more ruthless than them. Let them know that there was always someone better than them. The middle-aged pickpocket was shouting fiercely. Yi Qian seemed to be competing with him, but in fact, her gaze had already swept across the carriage. She had to see if she could find any clues in the crowd, to see if she could spot any suspicious people. Police and soldiers had a keen sense. For example, when a police officer felt that something was wrong with someone, something was really wrong with that person. This kind of intuition came from many years of experience in handling cases. From the other party's facial expressions, eyes, and actions, it became a sharp intuition. Yi Qian's intuition was famous. If she felt that there was something wrong with someone, there was most likely something wrong with that person. Most of the people in the carriage woke up with a start. Some of the bolder youths saw that there was a commotion and stood up with a yawn to see what was going on. Some were afraid that they would not be able to avoid it and did not even look. They either sat in their seats obediently or stood up and walked to the other end of the carriage. They stood far away to avoid being implicated. There were also some who were in a daze. The commotion just now made them frown unhappily. They turned their bodies from sleeping on the left to sleeping on the right. Facing the middle-aged pickpocket, Yi Qian calmly retracted her gaze from the corner of her eye. She looked coldly at the man whose face had turned the color of a pig's liver. The corner of her mouth slightly curved up. I'm not threatening you. I'm just afraid that you won't cooperate, so I'm warning you in advance. I'll start counting now. 1. She paused on purpose and scanned the entire carriage from the corner of her eyes again. Some people had already tiptoed and stretched their necks to watch the show. Most of them were young people. They paused for a few seconds to observe Yi Jian as she continued to count. He still didn't find anyone suspicious. It could be seen that these pickpockets were all tough pickpockets. They weren't people that could be intimidated just by bluffing. Yi Jian raised her voice and said to all the passengers in the carriage, "There are a few pickpockets in the carriage. The guy in my hand is one of them. There are also his accomplices in the carriage. Everyone, take care of your valuables to prevent them from being stolen." Everyone realized that there were pickpockets in the carriage when she raised her voice. They immediately lost interest in watching the commotion and quickly checked their belongings. They had worked hard for a year. Don't let it all fall into someone else's hands. Fortunately, the carriage had not been stolen yet. Yi Qian did not hear anyone's belongings being stolen. The middle-aged pickpocket who was being held down could not help but feel proud. He pretended to be furious. "You're F***king accusing me of being a thief? Go F***ck yourself. I'll kill you." Chapter 3764. He was still bluffing, but Yi Qian was completely unmoved. "It's not stolen. You just didn't have the chance to do it. I counted to 2 just now. Now I'll count to 3. As soon as she finished speaking, Yi Jian's hand moved. The passengers nearby could clearly hear the crack sound of the arm joint being dislocated. Then, the middle-aged pickpocket scream was louder and more miserable than the 4 young men's screams. With his scream, the passengers nearby were so frightened that they took a few steps back. The carriage was very quiet. None of the passengers dared to say anything. They all looked at Yi Qian. This soldier was really good. He didn't even hesitate to take care of a pickpocket. This was how it should be. The middle-aged pickpocket had always thought that Yi Qian was just threatening him so that his backup would jump out. Who knew that? This wasn't a F***king threat at all. It was all for real. Dislocating a perfectly good arm was much more painful than falling and dislocating it. Furthermore, it was very likely that it wouldn't be just one arm that would hurt. His other arm would hurt as well. If he didn't cooperate, his legs would also be dislocated. That would be even more painful. But it wasn't enough to scare these people who had been in the underworld for a long time. They had even used real knives before. Although it was very painful, it was tough enough. F***ck. I'll remember this. I'll F***king remember this. Enduring the pain, the middle-aged pickpocket's eyes were fierce. He gritted his teeth and said, "If you fall into my hands in the future, you'll suffer. However, you're in my hands now. One of your limbs has been dislocated. There are still 3 more that can be removed. Let's continue." Yi Qian had never been afraid of being ruthless in his life. He had used real guns against real people and seen real blood take countless enemies' lives. Yi Qian's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed the middle-aged pickpocket's other arm and said, "Not only will I dislocate your arm, I'll also cripple it. If you don't believe me, let's keep trying. 1, 2, 3. This time, Yi Qian paused for a very short time. It was only a few seconds. Then, the middle-aged pickpocket's other arm was dislocated by Yi Qian. A new wave of screams was heard. Some of the passengers' expressions changed. "I didn't F***king steal. Which eye of yours saw me steal? F***ck. I think you're the one who stole the money. Money was more important than life. Enduring for a moment would bring peace and tranquility. Taking a step back would bring peace to the world. Those who were a little stubborn would still be stubborn and refuse to admit it." With his incitement, some people actually believed him. "Comrade, did you get the wrong person? Both of his arms were dislocated, but he didn't say that he stole the money. You must be mistaken. Yeah, did you make a mistake? Look at how much pain he's in. If he really stole it, he would have admitted it long ago. None of us were stolen, right? Since no one was stolen, then there must be a mistake. Comrade, why don't you let him go first and investigate further? It can't be a mistake. We might have made a mistake, but they wouldn't have. My fiery eyes of truth can tell who's good and who's bad. What's the saying? What is wrong and what is right? I'd rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let one go. It's better to be cautious. What if it's true? Would you be happy to let him go and steal our money? Who was willing to do that? No one was willing to do that. The passengers who had been moved immediately shut their mouths. For the safety of their hard-earned money, it was better to kill 1,000 by mistake and not let one go. The pickpocket was smart. He wanted to stir up the crowd, but in the end, he shut everyone up with one sentence. The carriage fell silent again. Chapter 3765. The pickpocket, whose arms had been dislocated, started to panic. All his strength was useless in front of someone stronger than him. He was like a paper tiger that was F*** torn apart with a light poke. So next, was he really going to dislocate his legs? That's right. He was really going to dislocate his legs. Yi Qian was a woman of her word. The middle-aged pickpocket, who was already defenseless, was even more defenseless now that both his arms had been dislocated. Yi Qian grabbed him by the collar and threw him into the aisle. The pickpocket screamed as Yi Qian threw him onto the aisle like a rag. His head hit the seat, and he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Murder, murder! The middle-aged pickpocket, who had even stolen money from an old man, shouted for help. His eyes were looking at his accomplice in the middle of the carriage, whose fingers were yellowed from the smoke. Yi Jian was standing beside him, secretly observing where the pickpocket's gaze would land on. In an emergency, the first thing people would think of was to ask for help. If there was someone they were familiar with, the first thing they would do would be to ask for help. And if there was someone they were familiar with, the first thing they would do would be to ask for help, followed by strangers. Yi Qian, who was a sniper, caught the pickpocket's first look for help. A thin, middle-aged man with a sallow complexion entered Yi Qian's line of sight. With just one look, Yi Qian had a conclusion. She half-squatted on the aisle and grabbed the middle-aged pickpocket's ankle. Her cold voice drifted into the ears of the passengers in the carriage. You even stole money from an old man. You didn't kill him, but someone died because of you. You are the real murderer. The girl's whole family was waiting for her money to be sent back for emergency help, and you stole it. Her 2 children were studying, and her family still had debts to pay. You also stole money from the migrant workers. You stole their hard-earned money to live a good life, and now you're here screaming that you're innocent. Do you think you can fool the passengers? Not only did I see you steal it, but I also know who your accomplice is. After she finished speaking, the passengers in the carriage gasped. So he really was a pickpocket. They were almost fooled by a pickpocket. If they really let him go today, everyone in the carriage wouldn't be able to keep their hard-earned money. Yi Qian tightened his grip and stared at the sallow-faced man. Then he swiftly dislocated the pickpocket's right leg. Below his knees, his calves were no longer straight. Instead, they were turned outwards. The screams pierced through several carriages and drifted into the ears of the pursuing police officers. Quick, it's right in front. Quick! The police officers who had passed through the crowd were practically clinging to the ground as they squeezed through the crowd like they were squeezing noodles. They shouted loudly, "Make way, make way! Pay attention to your wallet and don't let anyone steal it." The aisles and entrances of the carriage leading to Yi Qian were crowded with onlookers. The policemen were so crowded that their caps almost fell off. The sallow-faced man, who had been sitting calmly all this while, heard his companion scream. His eyelids twitched, and he instinctively looked over. In the end, his eyes met Yi Qian's cold and sharp eyes. Not good. As this thought flashed through his mind, the man suddenly stood up. He pulled the window up with both hands and prepared to jump out of the window. Yi Qian, who had already noticed him and was waiting for an opportunity, was like a cheetah hunting for its prey. He rushed over at the fastest and most ferocious speed. Without waiting for the man to pull up the window, Yi Qian rushed over and grabbed the man's shoulder with one hand. Then he forcefully pulled the man back into the carriage. At this point, the window was already half open. Chapter 3766. The windows weren't locked so that they could escape immediately if anything happened. However, the middle-aged man didn't expect someone to be so fast. In the time it took him to open the window, the man's shoulder was grabbed, and his hand quickly reached into his pocket. He wanted to take out the stolen goods hidden in his pocket and throw them out. That way, everyone would probably rush forward to pick up the stolen goods he threw out. It would definitely cause chaos, and he would be able to take advantage of the chaos to escape. To be able to be so cautious at such a critical moment, it was clear that the man's skills were profound. He was a veteran who had dealt with the police many times. If he could make a decision, he wouldn't let himself get into trouble for the sake of stolen goods. However, he miscalculated again. Since Yi Qian had already caught him, how could he still have a chance to create chaos? Pickpockets were trained to be fast, but compared to a special forces soldier who had undergone strict special training, no matter how fast they couldn't be faster than Yi Qian. Just as his hand reached into his pocket, Yi Qian tripped and hooked his legs. Just as he lost his balance and fell, Yi Qian grabbed the man's neck and smashed him down the aisle. He did indeed use smashing. Special Forces soldiers didn't have many fancy moves. They only had the most effective, practical, and ruthless moves. They were as ruthless as possible. Yi Qian pressed the man down so that his chest would crush the hand he had reached into his pocket, preventing him from taking out the stolen goods and throwing them out. The man was at the bottom. The moment he was smashed, the entire car trembled. The surrounding passengers were stunned when they saw this scene. They saw a female comrade who was tall enough but had a slender physique and appeared to be on the skinny side, hugging a skinny man who was more than 7 meters tall, and throwing him onto the aisle together with her. A man was a man after all. No matter how skinny he was, he still had weight. For a woman to smash a man to the ground, how strong must she be? Not only did the middle-aged man who wanted to escape stop, but it also made the hearts of the spectating passengers jump. Pickpockets were tough characters. They couldn't afford to offend them. But now it was obvious that this female comrade was even tougher. Look, she took care of 2 pickpockets in one move. Amazing. At this moment, all the passengers in the carriage once again felt that the military comrade was very reliable. The middle-aged man started to panic. He had never failed in his theft business for more than 10 years. Even if his underlings failed, he, as the boss, would still be able to sit on the fishing platform. This time, he had actually stumbled, and he had stumbled in the hands of a woman. Although he did not manage to escape, he did not accept his fate so quickly. The middle-aged man began to struggle frantically. Although one of his hands was pressed against his chest, he could still move his other hand. F***CK, your mother. You want to fight me? He has a knife in his hand. Someone screamed to remind Yi Qian to stop the thief. At this moment, none of the tourists believed that the person being beaten up by Yi Qian was not a thief. Since he had taken out a knife, he must be a thief. The middle-aged man waved his knife, and the passengers standing in front of him stepped back one by one. Then the policemen who were squeezing in from the back of the carriage were pushed back a few steps. They had to continue shouting before they squeezed out of the passage. The aisle was very narrow. The middle-aged man who had been smashed to the ground by Yi Qian was frantically kicking his legs. The tips of his shoes kicked and resisted on the green rubber aisle. His movements were very large. The passengers at the front who saw everything clearly could not help but break out in cold sweat for Yi Qian. If the pickpocket managed to escape, it would be disastrous. Chapter 3767. Although that was what they thought, they did not dare to help. What a joke, they all had knives. If they went over, they might just be more of a hindrance. Yi Jian would not let the passengers help her. She was still able to subdue these pickpockets. She crushed the man's upper body, grabbed the man's left hand that was holding the knife with both of her hands, and forcefully pinned the man's back. Ah! The brutal twist made the man scream. His voice was so loud that the policemen behind heard it, and their eyelids twitched. The middle-aged man's entire face was pressed against the smelly corridor. His heart was pounding from Yi Qian's move. He already had the stolen goods in his hands, but he did not have the chance to take them out. He struggled with all his might. His neck was red, and he shouted in a rough voice, "Don't F***king force me to make a move. Let me go. You can make a move. I can charge you with assault. You can be sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. Make a move as soon as possible. I'll wait." Yi Jian, whose upper body was pressed against the man's back, spoke coldly. The man struggled until he was panting like a cow and was sweating profusely. As for Yi Jian, her voice was steady and her breathing was steady. Just by listening to her voice, one could tell that she was very relaxed now. What the F***ck are you doing? Let me go. Let me go. Do you know who I am? You pissed me off today. Let me know where your house is. I'll make your neighbors suffer with you. The middle-aged man whose hand was entangled didn't panic, but when something thin and cold wrapped around his neck, the middle-aged man panicked. What was the difference between having something around his neck and being beheaded? How could he not panic? However, Yi Jian laughed. If he knew where she lived, would her neighbors be in trouble because of her? TSK, TSK, TSK. She was bragging too much. Her house was in Dangwei Garden. The entrance was guarded by armed policemen, who patrolled 24 hours a day. The entire Dingwei Garden had an air defense test, and there was a flight screening area. Even normal phone calls could not be made. You want to enter Dingwei Garden? I'll make it difficult for you to move. You want to force your way in? You want to experience the feeling of a bullet piercing through your body? You can't find my house, but my neighbors won't suffer with me. Behave. Don't struggle. Yi Qian did not get up immediately. She continued to crush his back. She had to make him behave before she got up. How could the middle-aged man not struggle? With something strangling his neck, it would be strange if he didn't struggle. The more he panicked, the more he struggled. The shoes on his feet were even kicked to the side. However, he did not expect that the more he struggled, the more the thing wrapped around his neck sank into his flesh. It seemed that it would soon strangle into his flesh and break his throat. At first, Yi Qian did not stop him from struggling. He kept pressing down on his back until he realized that something was wrong and gave up struggling. Then, he slowly reminded him, "You can move a little more. That way, you can kill yourself." This was not a threat. The middle-aged man had experienced it firsthand, so he immediately behaved himself. He did not move, but Yi Qian did. She no longer crushed the man to death. She quickly got up and wrapped her hands around his neck, forcing him to raise his head. Her other hand pulled out the middle-aged man's right hand that was pressing down on her chest. Her actions were quick and nimble, and she locked the man's right arm behind his back. The silver thread was very fast. Yi Qian had already left a length that allowed her to tie his right hand. Both hands were tied together. The middle-aged man lay motionless on the aisle. His face was close to the smelly green rubber aisle. His line of sight fell below the seat in front of him. Chapter 3768. The middle-aged man wanted to move, but the thing around his neck was connected to his hands behind his back. If he moved, it would tighten around his neck. It was too dangerous. He didn't want to risk his life. Yi Qian knew how to make sure the middle-aged man's life wasn't in danger. He flipped the man over so that he was lying on his back with his hands pressed against his back. This position was extremely uncomfortable. The man who had just threatened Yi Qian's family and neighbors was groaning in pain. The police had already arrived. When they saw that the situation was under control, they shouted for the surrounding passengers to retreat to the side. "Everyone back off! Everyone back off!" They took out their handcuffs and prepared to help. Yi Qian raised his head when he heard them. He shook his head slightly and used his eyes to signal the people who came to help to pay attention to the surroundings. He said, "There's another one behind. Leave this to me." His accomplice was still so arrogant, even after being discovered. He was afraid that there were more criminals. The police on the train were all experienced. Although they didn't immediately understand Yi Qian's gaze, they knew what was going on. When they saw Yi Qian subdue a pickpocket that they had never seen before, they were shocked. They had recently received news that a gang of thieves was going to make a move on the Nanguang Railway. As a precaution, all the trains on the Nanguang Railway increased the number of police officers to protect the passengers' personal and property safety. They had an impression of the young pickpockets that they had caught before. They were all used thieves. But they had no impression of the pickpocket that was caught by the female comrade. They had never seen him before. This person, from the way he was dressed and the thick golden necklace around his neck, No matter how they looked at him, he looked like the leader of the gang. They didn't immediately understand Yi Qian's meaning, but surprisingly, they all thought in the same direction. The three police officers nodded and walked past Yi Qian towards the pickpocket whose arms and legs had been dislocated. The silver wire that hadn't been used in a long time finally had a chance to be used. As they spoke, the silver wire had already wrapped around the pickpocket's hands. Then it wrapped around the pickpocket's neck. The pickpocket started to shout, "Help!" at the police officers. "Police officers, help! Help! I'm going to be strangled to death. I feel terrible. I can't breathe. I'm going to be strangled to death. Help! I'm going to be strangled to death. He deserved to be strangled. You even stole life-saving money. You should be strangled to death." A traveler spat in the corner. He was afraid of revenge and did not dare to show his face. Yi Qian glanced coldly at the man who still had the guts to call for help. She squatted down and pressed on the man's chest twice before unzipping his jacket. Flipping open the cotton-padded clothes on both sides, he found that the inner lining of the cotton-padded clothes had another entrance. The inner lining of the cotton-padded clothes was made into a zipper. The stolen goods would be stored in the zipper so that they wouldn't fall out and wouldn't be easily discovered. The inner zipper was already half unzipped. Yi Qian pulled down the entire zipper and reached inside. She took out a silk bag. She took it out and stretched it again. Then, she took out a zippered wallet made of cotton and linen, an envelope used to store money in the bank, and finally a wallet. There were 4 items in total. Apart from the wallet, which probably belonged to the middle-aged man himself, the other 3 items were the hard-earned money of others. When Yi Qian handed over the 3 wallets to the police, applause erupted in the bus. Amazing. She was really amazing. One person subduing 2 pickpockets with knives. She was really amazing. And she was even a female comrade. Chapter 3769. The middle-aged pickpocket, who was lying on the ground in pain, heard the applause. A sinister look flashed across his eyes. Damn it, just you wait. Busybodies need to be taught a lesson. No one saw the sinister look in his eyes. Yi Qian, who was talking to the police, did not see it either. I know that an old man lost some money. He said it was wrapped in a piece of acrylic cloth and that the cloth bag was the old man's money. Yi Qian told the police everything he knew. A total of 3 passengers were stolen. You can go directly to the carriage to ask about the situation. The leader of the police officers smiled and said, "We came from the back and already understood the situation. We really have to thank you and your comrades today. I didn't expect the military school students to be so capable. Female comrades are not inferior to men." He gave Yi Qian a thumbs up to express his surprise. Another police officer handcuffed the middle-aged man who was tied up with silver wire. However, he could not untie the silver wire. He had never seen such a thing before and could not help but pinch it. It was very soft, but quite firm. He had no idea what material it was made of. Yi Qian untied the silver wire and looped it back around his wrist. In an instant, it became a silver bracelet. The other police officers looked at it several times. His neck was finally freed, but his hands were cuffed. When the suspected gang leader was taken off the train, he looked at Yi Qian with a sinister look. When Yi Qian looked back, he immediately smiled coldly. It was fierce and sinister, with a hint of smugness. Yi Qian responded with a faint smile. Threatening her family? He was not qualified to do so. The police officer who was talking to Yi Qian also saw it. Seeing this, he shouted, "Everyone saw you holding a knife. Do you think it's just a matter of a few days? Take him away." The 2 police officers who were taking him away pushed him off the train. The passengers on the train all applauded and sent him off happily. The train, which had stopped for almost half an hour, finally started moving again. Yi Qian followed the police officers to the stolen carriage. The old man was waiting anxiously. When he saw the police and Yi Qian walking over, he wanted to stand up several times, but his body was trembling and he could not. Yu Rong stood beside the old man and quickly helped him up. The stolen girl and her father, who was waiting to return home to pay his debts and pay for his 2 children's school fees, were already waiting for them. The old man got the money he brought to save his son's life, the girl got the hard-earned money to repair her house, and the middle-aged man got the tuition fees for his 2 children when they started school next year. They clenched their hard-earned money tightly. They lost it and got it back, so they were both sad and happy. Count them all and see if the money is enough. The policeman helped the old man back to his seat and reminded him, "They're still here. If you don't have enough money, you can make up for it from his wallet." Hey. The old woman sat down carefully with her hands still trembling. She put the cloth bag on her closed legs and loosened the rubber band. Then, she opened the cloth bag carefully. A pile of change entered Yi Jian's line of sight. 1 yuan, 2 yuan, 12 yuan, 12 yuan. When she had received the cloth bag, she had guessed that the denomination of the money was not large from the size of the bag. However, when she saw that it was neatly packed with even 10 or 20 cents, her eyes began to ache. The old man knew that he had given away too much money, so he did not count it. He only counted the large amount, which was 3,200. After counting, he repeatedly said to the police officer and Yi Qian, that's right, it's all here, it's all here. You should count the money you're giving away." The police officer's emotions fluctuated when he saw the money. "Tell us how much there is in total. We'll count it for you." Chapter 3770. The girl and the middle-aged man had finished counting the money. Not a cent less. They bowed and thanked the police, tears of joy rolling down their cheeks. "They're all here. They're all here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good people, you're all good people. Weren't they good people? If it weren't for them, they wouldn't have gotten the money back." Finally, the old man's loose change was counted. It wasn't much, only a little over 120 yuan. The total amount added up to 3,325 yuan, but it was all the old man's savings. Applause rang out in the carriage again. Yi Qian and the others declined to reveal more information to the passengers who wanted to send letters of praise. They returned to their seats without saying anything. Yi Qian and the police went to the small room where the train attendants rested alone. "Comrade, don't worry. We've been cracking down on the theft gangs recently to protect the safety of the people and their property. When you arrive at the station, we'll send people to escort you out of the station and onto the train. We won't let their accomplices have a chance to take revenge on you. But you have to be careful in the next few hours. We suspect that the middle-aged man we just caught is the leader of the theft gang. There are other pickpockets on the train. These people are used to committing crimes in gangs and will take revenge on those who report them. There's still 3.5 hours until you get off the station. You have to be careful in these 3.5 hours. Take turns sleeping. Of course, we'll also increase the patrols on the train so that the pickpockets who are still on the train won't have a chance to make their move." Yi Qian wasn't afraid of the pickpockets taking revenge. They couldn't find her, much less her family. Seeing that the police were worried that she would be traumatized, he comforted him. "We have 20 comrades with us. They have more people, so we have more people. As for revenge, I'm not afraid. The information of each of our comrades is confidential. They can't find us, and they can't find our families either." The police officer who was comforted by the military school student laughed heartily. "You military school students are really brave. Normal people wouldn't dare to stand up. Even if they saw a pickpocket stealing, they wouldn't dare to make a sound. Most normal people don't dare to cause trouble, afraid that they'll get into trouble. We can't help it. These people have knives on them. If they really want to be ruthless, we're afraid of hurting the people." At the mention of the train incident, the police officer couldn't help but sigh. They didn't want something like this to happen, but there were always things that happened. Every traveler who has ever taken a train thinks that it is not safe to take a train in the middle of the night. Other than a few familiar faces, there were strangers all around. How could he feel safe? After talking for about 10 minutes, the police officers who still had to patrol escorted Yi Qian back to his seat. When they passed by 2 hard sleeper carriages, the passengers were all asleep and had no idea what had happened in the carriages in front of them. Most of the passengers in the carriages didn't know what had happened in the middle of the night. They thought they had arrived safely. Yi Qian returned to her seat and sat down. It was only now that she realized how heavy her head was. Her comrades were all waiting for her to return. Before they could say anything, Dingling noticed that Yi Qian's face was a little pale. Thinking about how Yi Qian's nose was stuffed up, she reached out to touch Yi Qian's forehead. Fortunately, he didn't have a fever. Yi Qian, you must be tired. Have a good rest. We'll call you when we arrive. After Dingling finished speaking softly, she turned to her comrades who still wanted to ask questions and said, "Let's all sleep for a while. Yi Qian has a cold to begin with. Let her rest well." Chapter 3771. Dingling's reminder caused the other comrades to look over with concern. Yi Qian smiled and said, "It's nothing serious. It's just a common cold. Let's all get some rest. You sleep. We'll keep watch. Go to sleep. We still have about 3 hours before we reach the station. We'll leave 4 people to keep watch. Everyone rest. Don't disturb the other passengers' sleep." After exchanging a few words, they left 4 comrades to keep watch while the rest closed their eyes to rest. After what happened just now, their drowsiness had been chased away. They didn't feel very sleepy, so they could only close their eyes and pretend to sleep. Having dealt with a group of pickpockets, it didn't mean that the train was completely clean. For the next 3 hours of the journey, they still had to be on high alert and pay attention to their surroundings. Most of the passengers who had been disturbed didn't sleep as deeply as before. They closed their eyes for a while and opened them again. Just like that, they stayed awake until they reached the station. The lights in the hard-seat carriages were lit throughout the night. Only the lights in the sleeper carriages were extinguished. The train continued to rumble forward. As the sky gradually brightened, the number of passengers sitting in the aisles decreased significantly. There were even empty seats in the carriage Yi Qian and the others were in. The passengers who didn't have seats came over. When they saw that there were empty seats, they happily sat down. After standing for an entire night, there were finally seats for them. Seeing that there were still empty seats, one of the passengers went to take a seat first. The other passenger immediately went back to call the other passengers who didn't have seats over. "Be quiet. Don't let anyone hear us. I know. You guard it well. Don't let anyone else take it. I know. Hurry up and call them over. Damn it. After standing for an entire night, my feet are all swollen." They spoke softly and complained softly. However, they were still very happy that they had seats for the rest of the journey. Their appearance did not attract the attention of the male students on duty. Previously, they had noticed that the first few carriages were crowded with passengers, but there were seats in this carriage, and no one was standing in the aisle. There were people alighting, but no one was boarding. As a result, there were 5 or 6 empty seats. A man in his mid-30s with a crew cut and wearing a thick zippered navy blue jacket carried an old and dirty denim backpack as he passed through the 3 compartments. He seemed to be looking for an empty seat, looking around as he walked. When he reached the compartment where Yi Qian and the others were in, he seemed to be shocked by the dozen or so students in military uniforms. He immediately retracted his foot that was about to take a step out. Standing at the corridor connecting the 2 compartments, he hesitated for a moment before carrying the denim backpack over one shoulder and quietly entering the compartment. He walked past them softly, his gaze faintly sweeping over the students who were leaning against the back of their seats. His footsteps seemed to be lighter, and his expression was more reserved. The denim backpack hit the back of the seat, and the man was so scared that he quickly stopped and apologized. I'm sorry. Did I hit you?" Dingling, who was in a light sleep when her shoulder was hit, immediately opened her eyes and said to the passenger who apologized to her, "It's okay. You didn't hit me. It's good that you didn't hit me. It's good that you didn't hit me. I was just looking for an empty seat." The man stuttered a little. He apologized again and carried the backpack instead of carrying it. The 4 male students on duty all looked at him until he found an empty seat and placed the denim backpack on it. Only then did the male students withdraw their gazes. Dingling moved her shoulder gently. Although she bumped into it just now, she did not feel any pain. She only felt that even though the backpack was so big, the things inside seemed to be very light. Otherwise, her shoulder would have more or less hurt from the collision. Chapter 3772. Yi Qian was not completely asleep. Yi Qian, whose nose was so stuffed that she could not breathe normally, was not completely asleep. Although she did not open her eyes when she heard the commotion, she knew that a passenger's luggage had bumped into Ding Ling, who was sitting outside, turned her head to look at Yi Qian. Seeing her frown, Ding Ling could not help but ask softly, "Are you feeling unwell? Let's go to the pharmacy to buy some cold medicine when we get off the train." Yi Qian, who was still frowning, replied with a soft emotion. In the end, she did not fall asleep and sat like that until the sky turned bright. The weather in Nangguang was not bad. Although the sky was only slightly bright, the entire sky was as clear as a mirror. One look, and one could tell that it was a sunny day. Yi Qian pulled the window up a little. The fresh air blew in, and she did not feel cold at all. Instead, she felt very comfortable. Our Nangguang is like spring all year round. You can't see snow. The trees on the mountain and the greenery on the streets are all green. The temperature is also high. When I called home yesterday, my mom said that the highest temperature today was 18 degrees Celsius. I just need to wear a thin jacket. It's a little cold in the morning, so I need to wear a thick jacket. Ding Ling, who also did not fall asleep, smiled and chatted with Yi Qian. She was from Nangguang province, but unfortunately, she could not enter the house when she passed by. Her family had wanted to meet her outside the train station, but Ding Ling did not agree. She could not give her special treatment just because she was from Nangguang province. It was better not to come. Yi Qian had already seen the information of all the students and knew that Ding Ling was from Nangguang province. Hearing this, she smiled and said, "I heard that many Nangguang locals have never seen snow. Looking at the weather now, it is indeed a little difficult to see snow in Nangguang. My grandparents have never seen snow in their lives. My parents specially picked winter to visit me last year because they wanted to see snow. As for me, I had never seen snow before going to the National University of Science and Technology. I still remember when I walked out of the laboratory in the winter of my freshman year and saw snow. In the words of my classmates, I stood under the snow and was so happy that I became a retard. I even took a walk around the field. When I came back, my head was covered in snow. It snowed heavily in the winter of her first year of university. The snow was so heavy that it broke the branches of the green trees in the school. Ding Ling, who had never seen heavy snow before, got up early the next morning and ran to the unswept lawn to roll around. When she mentioned this incident, Yi Qian suddenly recalled the day when it was their class's turn to sweep the snow. The student in charge of the path leading to the light gas cannon laboratory came back laughing until he was out of breath. He told the class that he didn't know that the guy had made a fool of himself by rolling in the snow on the lawn. It was not bad that he had rolled a few meters in the snow. The group of them stood by the side with snow shovels in their hands and were dumbfounded by what they saw. When Ding Ling mentioned this embarrassing incident, Yi Qian immediately connected the dots. He smiled so widely that his eyes turned into crescents. Is it the big lawn near the light gas cannon laboratory? So it was he who was rolling on the ground. The students in my class were secretly watching the whole time, and you didn't even notice? Ding Ling, who was still thinking about how she had rolled around in the snow, was dumbfounded when she heard this. He thought that no one would notice him rolling around in the snow, but in the end, he was surrounded. When the train stopped at the station, Ding Ling's face was red. When they arrived at the Nangguang provincial train station, everyone sat down neatly. When there were only a few passengers left in the train, everyone stood up in their military uniforms. They put on their military caps, tidied up their lapels, straightened their military jackets, and carried their luggage tied with military green belts. They were ready to walk out of the train. They were full of energy and didn't look like they had not slept at all. Chapter 3773. A few passengers who hadn't alighted from the train didn't even dare to breathe loudly when they saw this. A few passengers originally wanted to squeeze past them, but when they saw this, they quietly retreated and alighted from the other train door. With 20 people in 2 teams, The sight of them walking out was a sight to behold. The passing passengers couldn't help but look over. The last passenger in the train walked out. He was carrying a worn and slightly dirty denim backpack. As he walked, he looked at the team walking in front of him. His eyes were cold and filled with a cold light. He held a phone in his hand. His dark and slightly purple lips moved slightly as he spoke to the person on the other end of the phone. Once she leaves the train station, give her a stab and squeeze into the crowd. No one will be able to find you. If this really blows over, you brothers can forget about staying in the underworld. How can you still have the face to stay in the underworld when your face is trampled to the ground? Teach her a lesson and let her remember not to stretch her hands too far in the future. Don't meddle in everything. The neat team formed a stark contrast with the chaotic crowd around them. When they were about to reach the underground tunnel, a child wanted to chase after them, but the adult beside him hurriedly pulled him back and scolded, "Don't you dare run around again. If you get caught, they'll break your legs and make you a beggar." There were many people at the train station. There were all kinds of people, and there was no lack of human traffickers. Children went missing and disappeared from time to time. Some were lucky enough to find them, while others weren't so lucky. On this side, Yi Qian, who was walking down the stairs in the underground tunnel, pulled back a child who was rushing forward while the adult shouted at the top of his lungs from behind. There were more people than usual. Their formation was scattered a few times. When they reached the underground tunnel, it became even more crowded. Passengers from several trains had arrived and were all walking towards the same exit. A few young people who didn't have anything in their hands squeezed through countless passengers. They stared at the most eye-catching team in the crowd with their hands in their pockets. No matter if it was old or young in front of them, they pretended not to see them and squeezed to the front just like that. Do you see that woman holding a child at the front? She's the one who's meddling in other people's business and ruining our plans. Brother Tiger ordered us to stab her and not the others. No matter where we stab her, we'll leave as soon as we stab her. There are too many people. They won't be able to catch us. Whoever can avenge our brothers will have to depend on their luck. A young man with a tattoo on the web between his thumb and forefinger said eerily. He led the way, bumping through the unoccupied luggage of the passengers, and then bumping through countless passengers to reach the front. Soon, they approached the students who were still helping the passengers with their luggage. A few of them secretly exchanged glances and slowly took out their hands from their pockets. Something flashed with a cold light and disappeared in an instant. The expressions on their faces became even more gloomy. Yi Qian was helping a young mother with 2 children. It was the same child that Yi Qian had grabbed when he went down the stairs into the underground tunnel. The young mother had a baby who was not even 1-year-old strapped to her chest. She was also carrying a large luggage bag on her back and a plastic bucket in her hand. There was no way she could take care of another 6 or 7-year-old child. If Yi Qian hadn't pulled the child back in time, the child would have been separated from the young mother. The little boy was very naughty. The young mother was embarrassed to tell Yi Qian that this was the first time the little boy had gone on a long journey. He was a little excited and had slept for a while on the train. Now, he was still very energetic. He thanked Yi Qian several times and was very assured that Yi Qian was holding his child's hand. At this time, they could choose not to trust anyone but them in their military uniforms. Chapter 3774. When a 6 or 7-year-old child was full of curiosity, he was not afraid of being held by Yi Qian. There were a few times when he tried to break free from Yi Qian's grip and rush forward. In the end, Yi Qian was worried that she would not be able to catch him. So she simply carried the little boy in her arms and said, "You can't run around, okay? If you run around, you won't be able to find your mother. You might get kidnapped by bad people and never see your mother again. Big sister will carry you outside. Big sister, when we get out, I'll sell you candy." Before she could finish her sentence, Yi Qian suddenly felt danger approaching her. She had no time to think at all as she was carrying the child. She turned around and swung the luggage on her back to avoid the danger. The bag was thrown with great force, and Yi Qian's speed was also fast. The moment she avoided the danger, she heard the sound of a metal object falling to the ground. It was a knife. Someone had just ambushed her with a knife. Yiqian's eyes were cold as she carried the child. She did not stay where she was and instead rushed out with the child in her arms. However, there were too many tourists around. Yiqian did not dare to make any big movements, let alone attack immediately. She was worried that if she did, it would cause panic and lead to a stampede. In her previous life, she had seen on the news that there was a stampede on the night of the New Year in High City. There were dozens of casualties, and it was the biggest public accident of the year. But now, there were too many people in the underground passage, and the path was narrow. She could only avoid and quickly leave the crowded area. Damn it! The two people who did not succeed saw that the knife they had thrown was kicked somewhere. They cursed under their breath and immediately contacted the people in front of them. They had already blended into the crowd and disappeared in the blink of an eye. There was no way to find them. The person closest to Yiqian was Yurong, who was walking side by side with her. The other person was Ding Ling, who was behind her, and a male student beside Yurong. It was normal for tourists to squeeze past them. From the moment they entered the underground passage, there had been a continuous stream of tourists squeezing past them. Some even squeezed between the two groups and hurriedly passed through. Thus, when Yiqian suddenly swung her bag to avoid them, the three of them did not react in time. What made them realize the danger was when Yurong heard the sound of something metal falling to the ground. He glanced over and saw a sharp knife about 10 centimeters long being kicked away by the feet of countless passing tourists. At this time, Yiqian, carrying the child, was several meters away. Yurong's pupils constricted. He immediately turned around and said to the students behind him, "Someone attacked Yiqian with a knife." He then said to Ding Ling, "Tell the child's mother that Yiqian is waiting outside with her child. You and the two of you to accompany her to find Yiqian." His words made Ding Ling's scalp tingle. Subconsciously, she thought that the person who attacked Yiqian with a knife was the accomplice of the pickpocket on the train. Otherwise, why would they attack Yiqian for no reason? The young mother, who was carrying a child on her back, happened to be carrying the child on her back. She was coaxing her baby who had woken up and was crying loudly. She did not notice anything wrong. She did not even notice that Yiqian was carrying her child and walking out quickly. When Ding Ling told her, the young mother thanked her gratefully. "Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't know what to do. In the future, I won't bring two children out alone. It's too troublesome and worrisome." Chapter 3775. As the young mother apologized, she was completely unaware that someone had committed a murder with a knife in broad daylight right next to her. Ding Ling and the two students accompanying her naturally didn't say anything. Ding Ling talked to her, while the two male students carried her luggage. The group of people quickened their pace as they walked out. Yurong and the others all knew what had just happened. None of them panicked, and very tacitly, they formed groups of 3 to guide the people. At the same time, a text message was sent to the person in charge outside who had come pick them up. The person who picked them up was a lieutenant. When a message came in, he immediately opened his phone. When he saw the message, his face darkened. Someone attacked a student with a knife. Got it. Be careful. Evacuate the passengers. He quickly replied to Yurong's message, and then he immediately walked towards a policeman patrolling the square. Using a knife to attack a military academy student? That was bad. We'll deal with it immediately. The policeman's expression also changed drastically. He immediately picked up his walkie-talkie to contact the control center and quickly activated the passenger evacuation plan. All 4 entrances to the underground tunnel were blocked, and the passengers who had just gotten off the train to wait in line. With the police and the staff at the train station keeping the passengers in line, there wasn't any chaos. No more passengers went into the underground tunnel. As more and more people entered the tunnel, it didn't seem so crowded when they walked out of the train station. Yiqian walked very quickly with the child in her arms. The 2 guys behind her couldn't keep up with her. If it wasn't for her military uniform, the 2 of them would have lost her. We're at the exit, almost there. We can get ready. They had been holding their phones the whole time, keeping in contact with the people guarding the exit. Their tone was ruthless and casual. In their early 20s, they had no respect for the law and thought they were very powerful. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The staff at the train station's control center, as well as the police, had already fixed their eyes on all the cameras in the underground tunnel. They entered the footage based on the time of the attack as quickly as possible. A row of uniformed students was very conspicuous in the footage. When they entered the footage, they started replaying it normally. When they replayed it to a certain point, a police officer immediately said, "These two people have been squeezing their way towards the student who was attacked. Double the speed." Now they were in a race against time. They had to lock onto the suspects first, then immediately dispatch the police. As the city with the most migrant workers, Nangwon's provincial government was also one of the first cities to install the Sky Eye. Especially at the train station, there were cameras at every corner. The camera clearly recorded the entire process of the murder. It also recorded how Yi Qian, who was holding the child, nimbly avoided the danger at the critical moment. Her quick reaction made the police officers who saw her clap their hands and applaud. Once the target was identified, the police were dispatched immediately. Two police officers even walked in from the exit to receive Yi Qian. They had already seen the cadet carrying the child. Fortunately, he was wearing a military uniform. Otherwise, with so many people carrying children, they would not have been able to spot him at first glance. The two police officers who had come to the rescue saw Yi Qian. At the same time, the guy who was about to make a move was also approaching Yi Qian. Yi Qian, who had already launched a sneak attack, quickened his pace, but he was still paying attention to his surroundings and keeping a certain distance from the other travelers. When someone approached, Yi Qian was already prepared. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.